New this evening, after more than a century, the Army has granted clemency to 110 black soldiers at Camp Logan, many accused of mutiny in the 1917 Houston riot. Today, the Army recognizing those overturned convictions in a ceremony at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, right here in Houston in Midtown. Here's Michelle Choi.
Yeah, overturning these convictions is a historic move, one that many, including the descendants of the soldiers, say is long overdue, but they're grateful for.
Private Leroy Pinkett, Private Edward Porter.
It's a painful past that's lasted more than a century. In what's known as the Houston riot of 1917, 110 black soldiers of the 3rd Battalion, 24th Infantry Regiment were stationed at Camp Logan in what is now Memorial Park during World War I, a time of extreme racial tension and segregation. After rebelling against discrimination, the soldiers were wrongly convicted of mutiny, murder, and assault, all of them represented by a single officer who wasn't even a lawyer. 19 of the soldiers were executed by hanging. It was the largest mass execution of American soldiers ever carried out by the U.S. Army.
And so the Army has undertaken a process to restore their honor.
Gabe Camarillo is the Undersecretary of the Army.
Having reviewed all these cases, it was clear there was a miscarriage of justice, due process wasn't followed, and now we get to do something to set things right.
To right the wrong of the past, the Army has overturned convictions of all 110 soldiers. Their legacies honored Monday at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum.
The Army hereby sets aside all 110 court-martial convictions of 324 soldiers.
Their service records will now reflect they served honorably, a reversal their families have been fighting for, including Angela Holder, whose great-uncle Corporal Jesse Moore was one of the soldiers executed. She's made it a lifelong mission since the age of 6 to find him justice.
This is just a day of relief for my family, and I'm just very honored to be able to see this day. And I didn't think it would come in my lifetime.
A sentiment shared by Jason Holt, whose great-uncle, Private First Class Thomas C. Hawkins, was also executed. Like Angela, Jason has fought for decades.
For us, his legacy is important because we stand on his shoulders. I hope his soul is at peace.
Again, that was Michelle Choi reporting.
The U.S. Army says relatives of the soldiers may be entitled to benefits. Just head on over to KHU.com to learn more information. And also, KHU 11 took a deep dive and looked back at the riots in a special documentary. You can watch 1970 Camp Logan Riot right now on KHU.com.
Deep in the heart. Why'd you say that? I said deep in the heart.
I can't hear you.
Deep in the heart.
Where's that?
Of Texas.
We end today's show in Texas, where major political fights playing out that could shape whether Democrats retake the House in the midterms and beyond. After the 2020 election, President Trump famously called the Georgia Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and told him to find 11,780 votes. Now Trump has called on Texas Republicans to find 5 congressional seats ahead of next year's midterms.
Are you calling in for a complete redrawing of the congressional map ahead of next year?
Just a very simple redrawing. We pick up 5 seats. But we have a couple of other states where we'll pick up seats also.
This week, Republicans delivered upon Trump's request and released their proposal for a newly drawn Texas congressional map that would add 5 Republican seats. It's being pushed forward quickly with a hearing set for today in Austin.
Little work, but we are there. Gus T. Renegade, an average type of Negro. That is an official term in the documents. Now, some of the folks that we're talking about today, they are actually listed as a good average type of Negro. Now, I don't know if I can really say that I am good, but I think I can at least say that Gus T, I think I qualify as an average type of Negro. Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on what racism, white supremacy is, how it works, and what it means to be classified as white. This broadcast intended for non-white people. White people do not need to listen to this program to better understand and or replace white supremacy with justice. Today's date, Sunday, August 17, 2025. So I have been told. The cows, we have been here for 16 plus years. What have we done in our time on the air? I can say, man, reading this book reminded me, like, wow, we've done a number of programs examining the racism that black soldiers have experienced. In fact, this here book reminded me the importance, significance of black soldiers and black journalists. I think we have spent a significant amount of time talking about both over our 16 years, but specific programs that were called to my attention as a result of this book that, man, reminded me way back in 2010. We had Professor Robert Allen as a guest on the program to talk about the Port Chicago mutiny. His book, oh my goodness, so important, and that is in California, not in Illinois, but super important, relevant to today's broadcast. We had old Jamie Salazar as a guest on the broadcast way back in 2023. Talked about the so-called racial mutiny in 1917, Houston, Texas. Incidentally, I was even reminded I had to go back because that was about 2 years ago. I had to go back and look. I told Mr. Salazar when we spoke with him, wow, you have egregious errors in this book. And we pointed them out. We couldn't even get to them all, but I made a point of saying that when I spoke with him, even though I'm still learning about the Houston mutiny, so-called, of 1917, but he was a guest on the program. You can go back and hear that 2023. Back in 2013, we discussed the documentary film. It had the Australian filmmakers with us, Black Soldier Blues, World War II, where they send black troops over to Australia because that's so close to Japan. And it was, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, I don't care if you got good, average type of niggers. You don't send no niggers over here to Australia. We got that white-only policy, so white people in the U.S. and Australia had to go back and forth about that. Remember, we talked about and played the sound clip. They had black troops over there, but they wouldn't give them guns. Stick you out in the jungle, close it out in Australia, no less, stick you out in the jungle and give you a stick and a baton, tell you see any Japs, club them. Black Soldier Blues, amazing documentary, Australian no less. And how could I forget, I got to reading this and they got to talking all about those lynchings. We did have Philip Dre as a guest on the program in 2021. What is his book? At the Hands of Persons Unknown. And importantly, we had Philip Dre as a guest on the program literally days after January 6th, where it had a slightly different context of at the hands of persons now pardoned. But Philip Dre's book is amazing. Anyway, to set the table for our broadcast for today, brand new book, just came out this calendar year. Folks who have heard Gus T at the cows for some time now, you know I've said non-white people, victims of white supremacy, should get one book that was published the current calendar year, non-fiction. Read it cover to cover. We have done our part. I don't even know at this point how many different books that we've had on the program that were published, authors and books that they published in 2025, but we have had some good ones. Hopefully we can add to that list today, since this here text talking about hangings, I guess, not quite lynching, if you want to parse, might be splitting hairs, especially with this one, but hangings, I'll read a tad from the book to start us off. I think this will give the correct context. In fact, I can give two quick snippets. This is from Chapter 2, Lynch Mobs and Night Riders. Lynchings increasingly became macabre specter events and were often commemorated by the collecting of souvenirs and publication of photographs celebrating the incident. After a mass lynching of 5 African Americans on June 15, 1918 in Sabine County, Texas, the Hark-Ryder Drug Company published a postcard photo of the murder. The photograph showed the 5 victims hanging from a tree with a caption that read, "The Dogwood Tree." This is the only branch of a dogwood tree, an emblem of white supremacy, and they capitalized every letter in white and supremacy. A lesson once taught in the pioneers' school that this is the land of the white man's rule. They put that in all caps too. The red man, once in an early day, was told by the white man to mend his way. The Negro now, by eternal grace, must learn to stay in the Negro's place. In the sunny South, the land of the free, let the white supreme forever be. And you know, white supreme, all caps. Let this be a warning to all Negroes be, or they'll suffer the fate of the dogwood tree. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Lynching was a national plague, but in Texas, it took on an especially brutal aspect. While lynching murders decreased in most southern states in 1915 and 1916, they increased in Texas as something already terrible transformed into an abomination of racist violence. It was as if some sort of communal malevolence existed in the cultural and social makeup of the Lone Star State at that time, a malice that turned lynchings into scenes of unparalleled sadism. I'm just skipping down to get the last sentence. The perpetrators of the most infamous spectacle lynching in Texas occurred on May 15, 1916, with nearly 15,000 white citizens crowded into the city of Waco to watch the maiming, torture, and burning of 16-year-old privileged black male Jesse Washington, accused of raping and murdering a white woman named Lucy Fryer. The perpetrators sold his teeth as souvenirs for $5 each. The chain used to suspend him in the fire went for 25 cents a link. That murder quickly became known across the nation as the Waco Horror. This is almost a century before David Koresh. 7 years later, when the Houston Informer, an African-American newspaper, referred to Waco as Barbecueville, it did not need to explain to its readers what event inspired the name. Barbecueville. They should have said that. And they were doing all that whimpering about child raping David Koresh. They should have at least mentioned, oh yeah, we had Big Blaze in Waco before, called it Barbecueville. Never mind, we get back. That is the table set, Delectable Negro, for our book today, just published this year. I saw the author right here in Seattle. He lives right down the road in Tacoma. Not quite as cool as Seattle, but close enough. But he was here at Elliott Bay Book Company just this summer to discuss Black Soldiers, White Laws, the tragedy of the 24th Infantry in 1917 Houston. Wow, I learned so much. Such a hoot to have our the author, as a guest on the broadcast today. Hopefully we can cover as much as possible. Joining us live to discuss a tremendous book, the author, Mr. John A. Haymond. Mr. Haymond, are you with us, sir?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, a little delay, but we got you crystal clear.
Excellent. Thank you.
For sure. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about your amazing, informative, brand new book. Appreciate having you share a little bit of your sunny, hopefully it's as sunny down there in Tacoma as it is in Seattle today. But for listeners, sure this is some folks' first time hearing about your book and you. Anything that you would like to share briefly about who you are and the work that you've done, sir?
As a historian, I would say that I'm a conflict historian by focus, which means basically I study the history of people behaving badly to each other. Black Soldiers Fight Laws is my fourth book, but I've also published about 32, 33 articles, most of which deal with racial justice or military justice issues, including a few years ago I published a piece on the Port Chicago case that you referenced.
I'm not surprised he mentioned that case when he was chatting with us at Elliott Bay Books a few weeks ago, and how that case, the Port Chicago mutiny, relates to this tragedy here in Houston that we're discussing today. Mr. Haymond, a veteran of the U.S. Army, served 21 years before he got so prolific with his pen, also an educator and public speaker. For folks who've not seen you or got their copy of the book yet, you are classified as a white man. Is that correct, Mr. Haymond?
I would be the picture poster of a middle-aged Caucasian male. Yes.
Dang. Okay. Why do you say that, Mr. Haymond? The poster child, you say, for the middle-aged white fella.
You know, middle-aged, brown hair, blue eyes. Yeah, that's me.
Okay. This broadcast, The Cows, we ask our folks who come on the broadcast, words are important. That's a point that you discuss in the book, I suspect would appreciate. But we ask our listeners, we use the term racism and term that you use in the book. I've already read white supremacy. I use those terms as synonyms, and I use the same definition for both terms. That definition, a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you think such a system exists? Do you think that is an accurate definition?
Yes and no. So, white supremacy as a concept, as a ideology, as a philosophy, as a hell-spawned political agenda, absolutely is a real thing. No question about it. I just think that the definition as you phrased it, I would say actually isn't broad enough. May I explain?
Oh, that's what we brought you on for. Proceed.
Okay. So I think the definition is just a bit too narrow for one reason. I absolutely would agree that the concept, the ideology, the practice of white supremacy stands as racism at its worst in every aspect of its existence. I also think that white supremacy has probably been the most dangerous and the most destructive form of racism in the world, certainly since the mid-1400s, for almost 600 straight years. And in that span of time, actions which were based upon an idea of white supremacy, predicated upon the doctrine of white supremacy, have resulted in the conquest of untold number of countries, the destruction of entire civilizations and cultures, the decimation of populations, the enslavement of uncountable numbers of people, the deaths of untold millions of human beings, and it has impacted every single continent on this planet except for Antarctica. Like I said, I'm a conflict historian. I study the history of people behaving badly to each other, and sadly, I'm never going to run out of a topic. I would say that defining racism as only a manifestation of white supremacy leaves out the other serious examples of racism that occur in other historic cases, such as the Armenian genocide in Turkey in 1916, or the Japanese military and governmental policies in China in the 1930s that resulted in the deaths of more than 10 million Chinese people. And it's interesting to note that the language that the Japanese used in that instance is very similar, in many cases, to how Jim Crow segregationists referred to Black Americans during the era of segregation in this country. The current ongoing cases of racism in Asia today that don't involve white people, such as the People's Republic of China's discrimination against the Uyghur peoples, the persecution of the Rohingya by the government of Myanmar, those, I think, can be classified as examples of racism, even though they don't involve white people. But racism is not just a white problem, it's a human problem. But my study of world history absolutely leads me to conclude that white supremacy in its practice has perhaps been the most destructive force humanity has experienced in the past millennium.
Much obliged. Thank you for the detail, Mr. Haymond, and being one, just answering the question. Doesn't matter if we agree, disagree, just answer the question. That's great. That's what we had you on the program for. My quick retort, I have one more kind of question, then we can get to the text. So excited. But my quick response would be that, yes, non-white people mistreat other non-white people. Lots of that. We don't even have to go that far to China, although I would agree. But I mean, hey, lots of non-white people mistreat each other here, all over the Western Hemisphere. Certainly, we could go. I thought we were going to get Rwanda in there, or some of the other illustrations. Tons of examples of all kinds of non-white people mistreating other non-white people. All of that metaphor for listeners is super duper small potatoes to white supremacy, racism, and particularly whether it's China, other non-white people here, Rwanda, whatever situation, all of those people are subject to racist man, racist woman. That's why I say, like, hey, if we're just talking about what is the dominant racism on this here planet, nobody compares. The Chinese don't come and tell white people what to do. White people, we boss. We just listened to that yesterday about white people going into Guam and other Asian companies. Japan putting their military installations down, right on cue for our subject today. But it's super duper small potatoes compared to the empire that you just listed. When white people get to practicing racism, it's dominate the entire universe. The stuff that you're talking about, for the most part, it's messing around people on the block. It's small potatoes. Am I being logical?
Yes, but I did caveat that, because I will agree, absolutely, especially when we look at it from an American perspective, or we look at it from a Eurocentric perspective on the world. There's no question white supremacy is the most destructive form of racism existent, and they're inseparable.
Much obliged. Much obliged. This, I said, I had one more before we get to the book specifically, starting with language, too, with the book. There was a non-white author. He wrote a piece. It's been a decade. I can't believe it. Getting old and be old myself. But he wrote this piece a decade ago, and he was talking about mainstream magazines, outlets that talk about racism publicly. And he said that white people are often greatly and sincerely pained by racism, but rarely are they pained enough. And I've been asking our white guests now for a decade. I've been saying, Mr. Haymond, you are a white man, a historian. You've written books about racism and human conflict. In your experience, do you think a sizable, even with the topic we're talking about today, do you think a sizable portion of people classified as white are often greatly and sincerely pained by racism?
I'm afraid that I don't think so.
Why not?
You will not have to go very far to find plenty of sincere, well-intended, earnest white people who will pick up a sign and march down the street and advocate for Black Lives Matter or, decry racism in whatever form it takes. But that's an academic knowledge. How many white people do you think actually have ever experienced racism in this country? Very few, I would venture to say. And I think you can have a head knowledge of something, but to really feel it, to really understand it, you have to have been touched by it. Now, I believe that white people and black people can absolutely stand together arm in arm and stand up together against something that we should all as people be able to recognize as a social evil or a human injustice. But if I and you together were to do that, one of us might be a target and the other one not, if there's a racist who takes objection to what we're saying, right? I think many white people, they feel strongly about it. I believe that they are genuinely disturbed by it. But I would question how many of them have ever actually gone down below the surface level to think about what it means to be a person of color in some parts of this country, especially in certain periods of our history where just the way you looked would have made you a target of untold amount of animosity for reasons that had nothing to do with you as a person. So I'm not sure that I could say that I believe that most white Americans feel racism or are deeply pained by it.
Much obliged, Mr. Haymond. One point I would raise, we've heard that from a number of our guests over the years in terms of people classified as white having not experienced racism, and that's one I don't think it's accurate. Now, if people mean white people have not experienced racism, meaning they have not been lynched, maybe I guess that's true. But you can experience racism from practicing racism. And just from the tidbit that I read at the beginning, oh yeah, you have lots and lots and lots of white people. We read about some in this book. They have experienced racism. I know how to tie a knot.
When you qualify it that way, absolutely. When you qualify it that way, as both from the perpetrator side as well as the recipient side, absolutely, no argument there.
That's, yeah, like white people are not ignorant about racism. This here book, whoo, man. If I will use it, I was going to say this at the beginning, but this is even better because my question is now we get to the book. Why in the world would someone classified as a white man, he says the poster child for a middle-aged white man, why would you want to write the book, Black Soldiers, White Law, and White Laws, and I will preface it. This is from the Indianapolis Recorder, July 1938, last of Houston martyrs freed from U.S. prison. William Burnett, last of the Houston rioters, in quotes, was released from the United States Penitentiary last Wednesday morning, July 29th, upon direction of the President of the United States. Upon his release, Burnett came immediately to Kansas. Obama. After a few days here, he planned to go to Detroit, where his mother lives. Burnett was tried for alleged mutiny, murder, willful disobedience of orders in time of war, the murder of 28 people, and wounding others. I'm skipping down a little bit. Burnett says, I wish to thank the NAACP, the churches, the press, and all friends who have had anything to do with bringing about my release. I have served the country in the Army during the best part of my life. Prior to the Houston riot, which was brought on by ruthless, cruel white officers, I had served 22 years of the best part of my life in the Army. I have done nothing during the years I was on parole of which I am ashamed. The government knows that. I am glad to be a free man again. I am not ashamed of anything I did in connection with the Houston riot. We were taught to be a man in the Army, and that is what we did in the so-called Houston riot. And that's the way he said it, so-called. Mr. William Burnett, Indianapolis Recorder, July 1938. Preface to my question, Mr. Haymond, why did you, a white man, want to write this story?
So several different factors come together to make me write this book. Me being a white man is probably not just secondary to that, but way down the list of things that happened. First of all, this was not the book that I actually set out to write. I was going to write something else, and this story was just going to be a part of it. I first came to this purely as a historian who has often written about and been highly critical of the U.S. military. And I'm very proud of having been a soldier. I loved being in the Army. Soldiers can also sometimes be the Army's fiercest critics, holding it up to, the standards that it espouses when it fails to live up to those standards. So I was setting out to write a book about the U.S. Army's history of capital punishment from 1776 all the way through to the present day. And there's a lot of injustice issues to touch on in that. This case was simply going to be one chapter in that book. And very quickly, I discovered when I started researching the Houston case that, first of all, I did not know as much as I thought I did. And most of what I thought I knew was wrong. When I realized how much these soldiers had been, how much the Army failed them, and more to the point, how much the Army betrayed them, that reset my focus. And I came at this from the perspective of, as a soldier, writing about an injustice that was done to other soldiers a century before. Along the way, I came across the personal connection, which is a bit uncomfortable for me, I have to admit. My mother's side of the family comes from East Texas. My great-grandfather would have been a young man in his early 20s in the 1917 trouble in Houston. He lived about 100 miles in a different county, but he absolutely knew of it contemporarily. I believe that my ancestors were vehemently opposed to racial violence and lynching because they believed that was just wrong. However, I know for a fact that they also supported the segregationist status quo. They believed that miscegenation was a social threat. They believed that black and white should be separated, and they never questioned it. And there's an old Latin saying that he who remains silent is taken to agree. And so they would not have thought of themselves as racist, but by our standards and our definitions today, yes, they absolutely clearly were. And so that kind of was weighing on me when I really started working on the story of these soldiers and what they were caught up in Houston, recognizing that people who would have looked every bit like my great-grandparents were the people who mistreated them. And that took a little bit of contemplation to come to grips with. And one of the things that I most appreciated was the descendants of these soldiers that I was working with in the early days of working on this case were the ones who told me that, yeah, I was approaching it as a white man, but that didn't disqualify me from being able to tell their story in an honest way. I can't presume, and I would never claim to know what it was like to be them. And I would never put words in their mouths. But I can use their own words and their families' histories to try to tell their story in at least hopefully a more complete way than has ever been done before. So first and foremost, I came to this story as a soldier, wanting to address a wrong that was done to other soldiers.
Wow. Context of White Supremacy. Our guest, Mr. John Haymond, author of Black Soldiers, White Laws, just published this year. Wow. Much obliged for the thorough response on that one, Mr. Hay, especially the little bit of family genealogy there. Fascinating. Now, take that for context. This is the very beginning of Black Soldiers, White Laws, a note on language and terminology. Start of the book. Mr. Haymond tells us, in writing a book dealing with the racism of the early 20th century and using primary sources to tell the story, it is impossible to avoid the highly offensive language that litters the historical record. In 1917, racial slurs appeared in newspaper articles, in court transcripts and official records, and in the sworn statements of witnesses and participants. It might soothe our modern sensibilities to censor the problematic language of the past and modify every quoted passage where an offensive word appears, especially that one particularly loathsome slur, Negro. As a historian, I believe that doing so would be an injustice to the men whose story this is. History, if it is to be effective and honest, must confront the full range of offenses and injustice exactly as they occurred, and truth is poorly served by censorship, even if it is well intended. The African American soldiers in Houston in the summer of 1917 were not offended by white Southerners' use of impolite euphemisms. They were infuriated by the blatant racism and deliberate insult of that specific word, the bigotry it represented, and the physical abuse that often accompanied it. If we today attempt to sanitize the record, we will lose the full picture of the verbal abuse and violent oppression those men endured. If we want to understand them and try to explain their actions, we must first understand what they experienced, because that was at the heart of their justifiable outrage. The racism of their time was at the core of it all, and so the pages ahead contain the words spoken and written in 1917 exactly as they were used at that time. Whew. And this book is, wow, uncensored through. In fact, they say one of my favorite phrases over and over. I think I saw it a few times. Negras is nigras. Woo! You cannot censor that one. Like, oh my goodness. Did you get any pushback from editors or any of the folks going to publication? Like, woo, this is going to be kind of rough to, maybe we can take a few of these out. Why did you think it was so important to, let's just get the record straight and be honest here?
Oh yeah, there was pushback. In fact, there was argument and controversy right up until the book went to press. I took out 3 sentences that my editor felt were too much of a challenge to the reader. I basically threw down the gauntlet and said, if you're offended by explicit cases of injustice and racism, then stop reading now, because this is not a happy story. And if you're in any way outraged by this, then your heart is probably in the right place. Those 2 sentences got cut. One of the earliest obstacles that I encountered when I was still doing the research for the book was the number of people, especially those who had been in the military or were currently in the military, who did not want to have a conversation about what may have been at the heart of this case, of what drove these men to react the way they did. Why did this happen? There were matters in mitigation that were never brought up in their trials. They were never allowed to explain why they had thought what they thought, did what they did, reacted the way they did. And so my argument was that if we don't see how, first of all, how violent and how dangerous the racism in the United States was in 1917 and in the decades leading up to it, then you don't understand the social context and the reality of these men's lives and of their families and the communities they came from. Secondly, if we don't look specifically at Houston and its racist policies and its Jim Crow laws and its incredibly brutal police department, then we will never understand what these men were faced with and what they had to deal with. And so I very much appreciate, Gus, you reading word for word that 2-paragraph section of the intro, because I think that speaks very well for why I chose to do it. And many readers so far have said this is not a fun book to read, but it's critically important. And I think the language in the book is one of the reasons it makes it difficult for many people. But that was the reality of the time, and that's the reality that those men dealt with. And I would feel like I had failed to tell their story as completely as I could if I did not also show you and every other person who read the book what they had to deal with.
Black Soldiers, White Laws. Appropriate title as well, Mr. John A. Haymond. Speaking of what the officers had to deal with, I've told listeners, I appreciate audiobooks. I listened to a little bit of this audiobook, job well done, but I read most of it for a billion reasons. Even the part that I listened to, I still had the book there so I could make my highlights and notes and such. But man, on my chunky list of why audiobooks are not quite the same as reading a book, the technology hasn't got us there quite yet. I'm sure it's coming, but at least at this point, they don't have pictures in the audiobooks. Whew. There are some great pictures in this here book. Even if that book is kind of beefy and I'm not going to Texas. I don't know nothing about Texas. Okay. Look at the pictures at least. Maybe look at some of the newspaper articles, because some great quotes from W.E.B. Du Bois and others, black newspapers, but look at the pictures. And he says, man, look at what the black soldiers had to deal with, being called nigger, which is true, but one picture. Whew. Now, he does mention this in the book repeatedly, and, it comes up, but seeing a picture. Whew. Special officers. What is, can you deal that one for our listeners? Who were the special officers that black people, black soldiers and black civilians had to deal with?
Okay, so that refers specifically to one section of the Houston Police Department in 1917. Houston Police Department, I'm going to have to paraphrase my numbers here. I don't remember exactly what the total number was, but their entire department was about 150 plus officers that year, of which there were only 2 black police officers, and they were only allowed to work in the black neighborhood in the San Felipe district. The entire police department had a pretty rough reputation. They were, for the most part, pretty heavy-handed enforcers of the Jim Crow laws and the racial segregation issues. But the special officers of the police department were the horse-mounted section. They had a reputation for almost unrestrained brutality. They were racist bullies. I have not been able to find a single contemporary commentator who said that a single one of them was less than that. As a group, if you took a group that had a bad reputation, that would be the Houston Police Department in 1917. And then you said, and these guys are the worst of them. That would be the special officers of the mounted section. And that photograph that you're referring to also has those 2 police officers in front holding those 6 dogs on leashes. And as soon as I saw that photograph, coming to this as a historian, I was like, there's only one reason a police department has dogs like that, those kind of dogs. These aren't German Shepherds. These aren't Rottweilers. These aren't like attack dogs. These are tracking dogs. And that is definitely a straight throwback to slave catchers from the era of slavery.
The dogs are described, and it's written out exactly what he just said. This is slave culture and got to go get our runaway niggers and all written eloquently in the book for sure. Seeing it, very different because you see the horses too, but the dogs. Special officers for Houston. Even who do we have these dogs for? What does it mean to be white? Look at the picture. That's why I say if you're not going to just look at the pictures. It's fascinating, fascinating. Okay, this is chapter 1. Haymond's Slough. What is that? Slough? S-L-O-U-G-H? Thank you. Still learning. Very beginning of the text. They came for Jesse Ball. In the dark hours before dawn on a cold December morning in 1917, his mother home in West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, had had a dreadful premonition that something like this would happen to him. African American mothers in southern states knew this fear all too well as they watched their sons grow to manhood. Mr. Burnett just talked about being a man in Houston. Grow to manhood and venture out into a dangerous world. Young black men in a society where Jim Crow overshadowed every aspect of their lives. A black man could be lynched for the slightest reason or for no reason at all, and parents could do little to protect their sons from that peril. Jesse's mother told him she had dreamed something terrible would happen to him if he left home for another hitch in the army. Somewhere out there, she feared, something dreadful was lying in wait for her boy. And I've said this a few times over the past summer, year, life. I was just black soldiers. Great. You learn more about the racial mutiny in 1917, but black misandry. So much of this text, yes, the racism is there. Yet, in fact, this so-called mutiny starts with a black female being abused. So, yes, racism is there. Black males, black females, black children, totally. But, man, there is a special targeting, focusing on black dudes, because these parents, as you wrote, they didn't say they're worried about their children. It's gender specific. I'm worried about my boys. Something could happen to these boys. It's not all black people could be lynched for any or no reason at all. It's black dudes could be lynched for any reason, and that specific threat that black males represent, it seems to come up in this book over and over and over, unless I misread. Did I misread, Mr. Haymond?
Not misread, as long as we can acknowledge that, as I reference in the book, there are a couple of instances where I use historical examples where black women were also lynched, never because of a crime they were accused of committing, but because they were associated, again, as you say, with black men who were the true targets of vigilante justice or a lynch mob. The incredibly important foundational report that the NAACP researched and published in 1919, 30 years of lynching in the United States, 1898 to 1918 is the title of it. And it's available. You can download a free copy of the original on Hathi Trust or several other different websites. Anybody who wants to understand the culture of racial violence in the United States back then should absolutely read that. And you will come away from it unable to prevaricate in any way over the fact that of the more than 3,000, I believe it's 3,600 and some people who were lynched in the United States during that time, more than 80% of them are black men.
Black male privilege, it comes up in so many ways. I have to share a few other tidbits where you write about this in the text, but Jesse, it continues with Jesse Ball, and this, we have talked about the spectacle of lynching and what this represents, those photographs. We even talked about the U.S. Postal Service. They had a really difficult time getting white people in this part of the world to stop circulating, those macabre images, black people being tortured and castrated and all, like, it was really difficult. It took a lot of work to get white people to stop sharing these images. That's why I said white people are not ignorant. They have a lot of experience just on a different perspective. But the macabre, we had as a guest on the program the author of the text Lynching as Spectacle, and she talked about this was like entertainment. That's how you end up 15,000 people coming out in Waco for Jesse White, and they bought Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
You have the railroad companies actually putting on extra trains as excursion trains specifically to convey people to the site of an announced lynching. And that tells you, number one, this is not something that's done in the heat of the moment. This is not a crime of passion. This is something that is publicized, talked about, planned, and it's not limited to just the Deep South. I hold Texas to be responsible for some of the worst instances of racist violence in this country. But my own home state of Florida, absolutely. Same thing happens there. But also states like Indiana and Illinois. You're, of course, familiar with that tragically beautiful song, Strange Fruit. I believe it's Billie Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that lynching was in Indiana. And you're absolutely correct. These are spectator events that are treated like entertainment. And that horrifies me in ways I can't even articulate.
Amy Louise Wood, author of Lynching as Spectacle. When I think of Florida and their lynching, Claude Neal comes to mind. That's the one where they castrated him and made him eat his own penis. That he's raped this white woman, so you've got to pay the ultimate price. Claude Neal, Delectable Negro. They have a whole chapter on Claude Neal in that book, Delectable Negro. But this is in same chapter, Hangman's Slough. Make me say that again. Down by Salado Creek. However, a row of 13 mounds of freshly turned dirt. Oh, wait a minute. I want to make sure that I get all this about Mr. Ball in. As a crew of Mexican, the caskets were loaded onto wagons and taken down to the slope to a wooded spot a few yards from the creek bank, where they were lowered into 13 waiting graves dug in a single row. Jesse Ball was buried as Jesse Moore, the alias he carried to his death. That was how he could trick his mom so he could go and do a second tour. He was 27 years old, a long way from home, and his mother was never able to learn where her boy was buried. As a crew of Mexican laborers began shoveling dirt into the graves, seems something racial about that too, the sounds of hammers and crowbars sounded through the morning. The gallows were disassembled, and the timbers were piled into trucks and carried back to Fort Sam Houston. By noon, nothing but mounds of ashes and hoof marks in the grass remained to mark the spot where 13 men had died. Just as the hanging was carried out under the cover of darkness and secrecy, all evidence of the act was quickly erased from the site as soon as the execution was over. Down by Salado Creek, however, a row of 13 mounds of freshly turned dirt remained in view. In other cases, the graves of executed men had been despoiled by people seeking to add a personal measure of vengeance to the punishment of death, or by macabre souvenir hunters. A rumor spread that some local people were talking of digging up the bodies of the hanged men and burning them. That sort of desecration would not be tolerated here. An armed guard was placed at the graves day and night for several weeks until the morbidly curious lost interest and sought other diversions. Even that word, I thought going to the carnival is a diversion, or Netflix. But anyway, and again, this is the very beginning of the book. That's kind of, when you say read, I say, man, Mr. Haley, this is not no fun read. Like, what you're digging up the grave? What? Man, I'm trying to get something fun to read at the beach, and you got this. I didn't enjoy this at all. But it is so important. And this right here tells you the culture. In my view, this is white culture. This is the culture of racism that produced this so-called mutiny. I think that is so important. I mean, they have to have guards stationed so they don't dig up the bodies to sell the teeth and burn the bodies? What? and that this was kind of standard practice. Is that true, Mr. Haymond? This sort of desecration of black bodies?
Yes and no. So there's definitely absolutely, in this particular instance, there's no denying the racist element in it. The attitude in Texas was that this group of 13 men had the temerity to actually take up arms and fight back against Jim Crow, and had killed white people in the process, and that simply handing them over to the army to be hanged in a formal way was, that would not satisfy many of the most ardent racists in Texas. The other thing, though, that's important to understand here again, because and I appreciate the fact that you have said, you've referred to context repeatedly. That's critically important. There's something in the frontier history of America where the desecration of bodies and the keeping of physical souvenirs from executed men, whether they be Native Americans or black men, or in the case of, the famous colossal disaster that resulted in Northfield, Minnesota, when Jesse James and his gang came to nothing, the bodies of two of the outlaws were stolen away by medical students and kept for souvenirs and medical process. So it happens throughout the American frontier, but there's no argument over the fact that it specifically was an element of lynching and racist violence in the South. Absolutely.
Thank you for the detail, Mr. Haymond. I appreciate you making sure you added some volume to your voice for the racial component of these desecrations, for sure. Man, this book has so many important tidbits. I learned so much about this. As you said, I didn't know practically anything about this case, even though we had talked about it before. I learned so much more detail, and then you give so much just in terms of what was happening at this time, early 1900s, right, World War I, so that people can understand that this is the culture of white supremacy, that this event happened. And I think this portion right here, this is from Chapter 2, Lynch Mobs and Night Riders. And wow. You write, African American people in the South lived under an ever-present threat of violence, maybe everywhere, not just the South. Never for a moment forgetting the risks they endured as people of color. The writer Richard Wright recalled of his childhood the white brutality that I had not seen was a more effective control of my behavior than that which I knew. The actual experience would have let me see the realistic outlines of what was really happening. It remained something terrible and yet remote, something whose horror and blood might descend upon me at any moment. As a black Southerner of the Jim Crow era recalled, in those days it was kill a mule, buy another. Kill a nigger, hire another. They had to have a license to kill anything but a nigger. We was always in season. Beautiful quotes all throughout the book. Brilliant work, Mr. Haymond. Continues, around the turn of the century, existing traditions of racial segregation were increasingly codified into legal statutes as the social doctrines of white supremacy gained a new foothold in formal law. Across the South, pulpit-thumping preachers and campaigning politicians declared that just as man was created by God to have dominion over the beasts of the earth, so too was the white man placed upon the earth to have dominion over all other races. Many of the white folk sitting in the pews or crowded together in public meeting places fervently agreed. The federal government had not been able to force them to change their attitudes during Reconstruction, no matter how many blue-coated soldiers or Yankee carpetbaggers came south, and no social crusaders in the North would make them change now. This was how Jim Crow segregation was conceived and born, founded upon the false mythologies of a lost cause that existed only in romanticized memory. It was nurtured in the paranoia and hostility of a citizenry that feared the transformations of a new emerging social order. It was confirmed by the bastardization of Scripture invoked by those whose actions were the very antithesis of Christian charity. I use the phrasing, the religion of white supremacy, and that sort of God has ordained all of this. The Negro is supposed to be answer to the white man. The white man was put here by God to rule the earth, and if everybody just leaves that alone, we will all get along fine. I'm kind of putting it in my own phrasing, but that is almost kind of stated in the text a few times out, unless I misread. Support of white supremacy, racism, and really torturing, brutalizing these black people, this being given as though God has told us this is the way the planet should be run. That seems to be a major theme in the book as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think one of the factors that one quickly starts to see coming up over and over and over in every kind of extremist ideology, and it's absolutely at play in the racism of the American South, the beginning of the 20th century, is that this is predicated by divine doctrine, or this is how God ordained it. And I'm of the belief that we should always be very careful for anybody who presumes to know what God said on any particular question that benefits them in particular. This is not something that only begins during the age of segregation. This actually begins way back in the American slaveholding experience prior to the Civil War. It's based on 3 separate sections of the Bible. The first one being in Genesis chapter 9, where Noah, after the flood, curses his youngest son, Ham, because he had seen his father naked because his dad got drunk, passed out, and Ham told his brothers about it. According to Genesis chapter 9, Ham was also known as the father of Canaan, and Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." Now, nowhere in there does it say anything about the racial identity of Noah or his sons. But starting in about the 3rd, 4th century of the Common Era, during the kind of the rise of the early medieval Christian church, you find Ham being always interpreted, the curse of Ham being applied to the Egyptians. And they are on which continent? Africa. And they are darker than European Caucasians. And that quickly spreads to the sons of Ham being identified as Abyssinians or Indians. And that then just kind of mutates into that phrase, the sons of Ham, being understood by racist American Southerners or slaveholders as being a biblical injunction that, well, see, God cursed black people to serve his brothers, and his brothers, nowhere does it say that his brothers were white either, but that's the inference given. And then later on in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians, when the Apostle Paul instructs slaves who happen to be Christian to respect and obey their masters, and that slave owners who were Christian were supposed to treat their slaves justly and fairly, American racists and segregationists pointed to that and said, see, it's in the Bible. It's condoned. Well, they overlooked the fact that in the Roman Empire, in which period of time the Apostle Paul wrote that letter to the Corinthians, anybody could be a slave. Slavery was not limited to members of one race only, and people could voluntarily sell themselves into slavery and quite often had the option of regaining their freedom at a later date. The American experience of chattel slavery is one of the only instances in the world where slavery was restricted to a racial identity. And that, of course, was something that American defenders of the practice of slavery and then later the practice of racial segregation, they always left that out of the discussion.
Deliberately leaving things out of the discussion that comes up a few times in the text. You have so many just amazing quotes. I read one from the Indianapolis Recorder, Mr. Burnett, already. We were trying to be a man down in Houston, but you have so many throughout the text. This is another one right here. This is from the chapter Semper Paratus. Show off my Latin that I don't know, always ready.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Hey, see. It would seem, wrote an editor of the Richmond Planet, that the war would tend to allay race prejudice and bring closer together the races in the South. It has had an opposite tendency, for the number of lynchings has been steadily on the increase, end quote. As one historian notes, the reason for the increased violence against African Americans was simple. White Americans resented the sight of blacks with weapons, even, or perhaps especially, if the blacks were in the uniform of the U.S. Army. Also, black Americans with guns and in uniform had a disquieting tendency to insist on their civil rights, end quote. Skipping over a page or two, this is another quote. An 1898 editorial in the Washington Post stated, "This is a white man's country, and the whites are not willing and cannot be compelled to accept the Negro on equal terms in any relation of life," end quote. Local officials made similar statements. When a black soldier was put on trial in Macon, Georgia, the city prosecutor declared in his opening statement to the court, "I'm going to show a nigger soldier that he is the same as any other Negro," end quote. Woo! Spectacular use of quotes throughout the text, Mr. Haymond, excuse me. One, kind of two questions off of this. One, the particular racist animus towards black soldiers. Like, oh my God, even that seems so strong even before the so-called mutiny. We don't even want these niggers here. I already said that for Australia, so this is worldwide, but we don't even want these niggers here. Can you send them someplace else? Can you find someplace else? Like so many white people, we were up in arms way before we even got to that. Can you talk about that one?
Yeah. If you study the history of the American Army from the period of the end of the Civil War until the beginning of World War I, and not coincidentally, that was actually the subject of my second book, The American Soldier. And I had a single chapter in there that I devoted to the African American experience of being men in the U.S. military during that era. I learned so much that I'd never even thought of before. In frontier communities where there was a threat, the Army was always needed. People were always clamoring for the Army to protect them from threats that probably often did not even exist from Native Americans. The question of whether or not black soldiers were welcomed or resented seems to have everything to do with what kind of prejudices and bigotry that frontier community had imported with them from the East or from the South. There were no permanent black units in the Army until after the Civil War. And they were under constant threat of being removed, just done away with completely whenever budget crises forced the Army to downsize. But the Army kept them, partially because they were just so damned effective. They were good soldiers. They had an outstanding service record as regiments. And they served in some of the toughest environments in the frontier period and did it spectacularly well. Their discipline rates were usually higher than comparable units. They had a much lower desertion rate than any white unit in the Army at the time. So for the African American community nationally, these black men in uniform of the U.S. military were a source of immense pride. For white segregationists, they were the embodiment of everything they feared. Because these are black men who are not tipping their hat to them in the street. They're not standing there with a white towel over their arm in the restaurant as their waiter. They're not carrying their baggage as a porter at the train station. These are trained soldiers, military men, armed by the U.S. government as soldiers of their nation. They are the absolute living threat to everything that white supremacy is desperately in that era trying to cling to.
Black misandry seems like it's right there again, since we're just talking about black males who are soldiers at this time. But for the Harriet Tubman, for sure, remember. But I mean, this story we're talking about, it was just black dudes who were in this event. The part two.
Gus, may I?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just for historical context, it's important to note that at this point in history, only men could serve in the Army. Whether you were white, black, Mexican, of any race, didn't matter. Women were not yet in the military establishment. So it's all male.
Much obliged. Much appreciate. That's why we got a historian here. The part two that I wanted to pivot off of that quote that I read, you have so many, it's lots of sources here, well footnoted, like, wow, great scholarship. But specifically, the black publications of this time period, like early 1900s, it is, wow, I just said the Richmond Planet, I think that's a black publication. You can correct me if that's an error. W.E.B. Du Bois is, liberally quoted. The Indianapolis Recorder, I read that one before. I think that's another black publication. Wow, they have just the broad axe. I think I mentioned that when we were spoken before. You found so many extraordinary sources. Just can you talk about both those as a resource for this book, and then them not even being valued? Like we probably don't even know the half in terms of things that have been lost over the years.
Well, to answer the second part of that first, you're absolutely correct. As a historian, it's one of the things that hurts my heart. You know that there were numerous active, dynamic black publications being published every week in the United States, especially in northern cities. Houston had, I think, 2 black papers. Major cities like New York, Chicago, or Washington, D.C. had multiple black publications that were producing regularly. But trying to find intact archives that actually contain those publications is so difficult. And partially it's because, just like with black personal histories, the practice of taking oral histories from Appalachian peoples or Native Americans, that was done also to former slaves, but the black experience in the American South during those years of segregation was not just overlooked, in many cases actively repressed. And so those personal anecdotes and those personal stories that make the history come alive, many of those have been lost forever. Black publications and newspapers were not valued as highly as their white counterparts when archives were being created in the middle of the 20th century. And so quite often they were either poorly curated, which means they may not have survived well over the decades, or, as in the case that I discovered when I was trying to find copies of one of Houston's black newspapers, the basement had flooded years before and they were destroyed. And that broke my heart. And so from a researcher's point of view, when you're trying to find all these voices that have been left out of the narrative for so long, and you're trying to give a place at the table to points of view that have been overlooked or ignored, the fact that their stories were given less respect and valued less is not only a tragedy in itself, but it makes it so hard then to bring them back from the dark reaches of the past.
Context of White Supremacy, Mr. John A. Haymond, author of Black Soldiers, White Laws, Not Valuing particularly black people who are making an effort to address racism, at minimum, address the racism they personally experienced or racism that they see around them and trashed, allowed to flood, that sort of thing. Anywho, this is man. There's so many passages. There are lots of racism to pick from in this book, but there's so many passages that, in my view, reveal a lot. Even though this one is not even on the main aspect of the mutiny, but it reveals so much about what it means to be classified as white, what racism, white supremacy is, and how it works. So they're talking about the environment to having this black regiment come into Houston during 1917, World War I. What's this environment going to be like? And they're talking about what is the view of black people at this time. This is chapter 5, A Nest of Prejudice. You write, a correspondent for the NAACP, Martha Gruning, described Houston as a hustling, progressive southern city, and as southern cities go, a fairly liberal one. She followed that positive note with a caveat. It is, however, a southern city, and the presence of the Negro troops inevitably stirred its Negrophobe element to protest. I thought that was a great quote. I'm skipping a little bit and you continue. Just how widely this view permeated white society. Wait a minute. Gotta include, because this is important. Gotta get this paragraph. Racial harmony in the city was a scale that tilted only one way, with a system in which white citizens held all the power, influence, and control. One mid-century historian described it as a tenuous situation that required the patience of blacks to accept the 100 forms of insult and humiliation which most of them were daily required to endure, and upon the discretion of whites not to push the Negro too far. Official policies and long-standing customs were used to keep black citizens firmly in their prescribed place. Many white Houstonians agreed with Benjamin Riley, a prominent Texas temperance campaigner who declared in 1906, the dominant characteristic of the Negro is that of submission and tractableness. For black citizens, their ability to live unmolested in a society dominated by white supremacists often came down to how convincingly and consistently they could conform to that denigrating image. How could I leave that out? Now, just how widely this view permeated white society in that era was demonstrated in 1909 by a survey of Southern University students who were asked by a professor to write essays describing their personal views on African Americans in their respective states. One student wrote, "The Negro of today is insolent, ungrateful, and even brutish in his attitude toward the white people." One of his classmates declared, "No man with a drop of Southern blood in his veins will stoop so low as to associate with the black man, no matter how highly educated he may be." Sorry, W.E.B. Du Bois. Another respondent wrote, "The Negro is more like a mule than anything I can think of. It is said of a mule that he will carry you 99 times to kill you the 100th. So it is with the Negro. He will prove faithful for many years, and at the last kill you and all your family. You cannot get the brute out of the Negro. Therefore he must be kept under subjugation." Wow. Just what does it mean to be white? But I thought that one was stunning because they're not even, I say Negro just because that's what I say all the time. But hey, let's be explicit. They are saying Negro. Nobody here said nigger. These are college educated, so we can't get that standard. Oh man, the racists, the Klan members are just toothless and uneducated and illiterate, and they all drop out of school at these are college students from a pretty wide spectrum of geographic locations, and they all seem to have come to the same conclusion about the danger of the Negro. That, in my view, hey, what does it mean to be white? This is telling us a lot, right? And from college-educated students, I would love to get some of these essays, Mr. Haymond, to see what exactly did they say, unvarnished, uncensored, like we said at the beginning. But wow, what was the thought process in including this to give us extra context, Mr. Haymond?
I was absolutely prepared when I was doing my research, when I'm in the archives, when I'm reading through contemporaneous accounts. I was absolutely prepared for the perspective of what, if I can be forgiven for using the term, white trash, rednecks. You know, the people who use the N-word every sentence. What I was not quite prepared for was how suddenly I realized that there's an even more dangerous diatribe, and there's a more lethal type of racist language that occurs in some of these historical sources. May I read you a short quote?
I'm begging you, please.
Okay. So this is 6 days after the violence happened in Houston that August in 1917, and this is from a letter by a man named John W. Link, who's the president of a Houston real estate company. And he says, when armed, the Negro wants to be lawless and has but little knowledge of his obligations to the government and possesses practically no national patriotism. The minute you give them a gun and authority, they become overbearing and dangerous. He concluded his rant by declaring, the Negro is happiest and most contented when he's under the dominion and control of the white man. And now it's me speaking. Reading through Link's entire letter, one is struck by the fact that he never used a single racial slur in his diatribe. His brand of racism, however, was nonetheless blatant and obvious, and it was expressed in the clear, articulate language of an educated man who was an unapologetic white supremacist. In that sense, that made his polemic even more dangerous and unsettling than the barely literate scribblings of some white people who littered their testimony with slurs and profanities. That is the part of the white supremacist polemic that is so often left out of studies and histories of this part of American history. You know, we're all used to the hood-wearing, cross-burning, image of the KKK or of a bunch of rednecks during the civil rights movement attacking freedom marchers. But the fact that they were very educated, articulate, literate Americans who would express the same ideology but never ever stoop to the level of a racist slur, that often gets overlooked. That is white supremacy at its most dangerous, I would argue, because that's what makes the violence possible. That's what overlooks and excuses lynch mobs. That's what gives a pass to every T-shirt wearing redneck who ever threw a rock through a black church window. That's where the danger lies.
I highlighted the passage that you read as well, Mr. Haymond. I also thought that was super important because you have a number of those, unless my memory is bad. It's a number of points in the book where you kind of stop and point that out for readers that, wait a minute, this white person, they're not, just as they're not saying Negro and all that, but and even sometimes it would seem like this is a white person who is maybe well-intentioned and trying to be helpful to a degree, and even that's what I started. I said, I'm an average type Negro. That's another one right there, because they didn't even say nigger. That was the Negro, if that, whatever. But he's a good type Negro, well behaved, and talking. So you think, oh wow, okay, but no, the same sort of just. This is what does it mean to be white? We are supposed to be in charge. This is how God has ordained it. Whether it's Negro, it really comes down to the same thing. White people are in charge, and the Negro is best under the dominion of white people. It is amazing. Matter of fact, I would say there's another illustration of this. Pardon. Just a few pages, same chapter, a nest of prejudice, where it's the same sort of illustration where it would seem like you'd have white people who are not racist, not so fast. You write, rather than keeping prostitution quietly contained behind closed doors, the new policy simply pushed the working girls out into public view. Most of the white prostitutes moved to other towns to continue their vocation, but many of the black prostitutes had no choice but to ply their trade on the streets, which put them in view of the police. The police aggressively, probably special officers, the police aggressively arrested black prostitutes, but rarely detained the white men who were some of their most frequent customers. As the anti-prostitution campaign gained momentum, the city's local anti-saloon league mounted a simultaneous effort to ban alcohol within city limits. And that's such a major theme in the book. They keep saying that these Negroes who mutinied in Houston, they were drunken, they were no count, they were misbehaved, they were hyped up on that hooch and came in to kill white people, and that's why we got to kill them all. But how in the world did you verify that some of the most frequent customers of these black prostitutes in Houston were white men, Mr. Haymond?
It's actually part of the social record of the city at that time. There are polemics written by white ministers, white government officials, deploring the fact that white men would seek out black prostitutes. And the idea of don't let the races mix was most viciously enforced when it was black men, white women, as I gave several examples of in that second chapter that you quoted from already, lynch mobs and night riders. But it also was deeply troubling to those who were truly committed to the idea of white supremacy, where there should be no mingling of the races at all. And the fact that it was Houston city officials found it impossible to completely eradicate white men patronizing black prostitutes.
Impossible. Wow, that impossible.
But they preferred not to talk about it. They preferred not to talk about it in polite society.
Wow. Now, that's the sort of that hypocrisy I always highlight, because individuals like Strom Thurmond, I know that's not Texas, South Carolina, I know, but still, will white supremacists stay away from the Negro? And particularly with someone like Strom Thurmond, we can't have the Negroes in our schools. They'll rape our girls, and we can't have them in the class and all that. And he's raping a black child and had a child by her. We read Dear Senator Essie Mae Washington Williams, but it's so much of that, and I point that out all the time, where you will have racists stay away from the Negro. We got to have separation. You got to stay on your side of town. If that's the case, why is it impossible to stop these white men from patronizing black prostitutes? And this is widespread. Minister Malcolm X talked about the same thing. That sort of, and I point that out when people say the way that we'll end racism is to have more interracial relationships. Wrong. Houston, we have a lot of interracial. The bedroom is well integrated in Houston. It has not solved this problem at all. That's something that I think that is important to point that out. But do you see that pattern where you have lots of long record? Thomas Jefferson, racists, slaveholders, people stay away from the Negro, and then as soon as it gets dark, they're creeping over to the colored side of town and to the brothel on the colored side of town, no less. Do you think that's something important to be pointed out as well, Mr. Haymond?
Actually, I can give you a detail that's not in the book if you'd like.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Jesse Moore, the soldier whose story opens the book, who was born Jesse Ball. His father was a white man. And I only know that because the entire first chapter is written from family history that was shared with me by Jesse's grandniece, Professor Angela Holder, who's a teacher down in Houston today. She was incredibly generous, shared photographs, family records, family stories. And Jesse Moore's father was a white man in Louisiana.
Wow, that's wow. Oh, we did have the mention of you did tell us that about the parish, but wow. The half has never been told, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Edward Baptist, where he talks about Louisiana and that being they are famous. If you want to buy a nigger, especially a high yellow nigger wench, and do some sexual fooling around, do something strange for some change, Louisiana, like, oh my goodness, that he has extensive writings in that. Wow, that is wow. I don't even know what.
If I may, when you're talking, you mentioned earlier, the hypocrisy that one encounters in this history, and yes, the hypocrisy is an undeniable aspect of this. You're familiar with the phrase "different strokes for different folks"?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, we have a military equivalent of that: different spanks for different ranks. Meaning, some people get away with everything, and other people are always going to get slammed for the most minor infraction. Something that somebody who's better connected, higher ranked, better educated, whiter, gets away with. I published an article a couple of years ago with a really close friend of mine. She was the retired JAG colonel who was the lead counsel on the Clemency project that I served as a lead historian on. And most of my legal knowledge in this book comes from her guidance. But she and I co-authored an article called Deja Vu All Over and Over and Over Again, Racial Inequities in the Military Justice System. And we showed through just numerous examples over decades that lower soldiers who are not white, lower ranking soldiers who are not white invariably face harsher punishment for the same crimes that military courts would either excuse or only mildly punish higher ranking white soldiers for. So it's a problem that has permeated through the military's culture for 2 centuries.
Colin Powell is rolling over in his grave. I'm going to have to get that article. I'll share that with listeners, and I'm not surprised, but I'd never heard that in my life. Different spanks for different ranks. Wow. Wow. Right. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Haymond, and the hypocrisy underlying all of that. And even that is a form of the domination. I don't know the full story with Jesse Moore. I don't know the full story with his white dad. But I mean, that right there is a form of the domination. Probably why they found it impossible to keep white men out of the Negro brothels in Houston, because that is a part of the domination. Even Strom Thurmond, the black female that he was having sexual intercourse with, was a child. It's child rape. She was working in his house too. So if she says no, am I fired? Come on.
Right. That's part of the power dynamic that is always a concern in issues of both sexual assault and racism.
As I'm getting the rest of my questions, retired firefighter, did you have a question for Mr. John A. Haymond, author of Black Soldiers, White Laws, just published this year, non-fiction about the so-called 1917 racial mutiny in Houston, Texas? Retired firefighter in Florida. Oh, we already mentioned Florida. Claude Neal. Did you have a question for Mr. Haymond?
Yes, sir. I have a question to Mr. Haymond. It's not directly with the book, because I haven't read it yet. But it's something in general that's based on military with non-white people being engaged in such. How could it be just to order non-white people who were legally mistreated based on color to join this area's armed forces, only to be mistreated in uniform, and after being released, suffer with more mistreatment?
That is a foundational question. So in the book, I actually discussed that both before the Houston incident and after, because when the Spanish-American War kicked off in 1898, Black community leaders, journalists, activists wrote these impassioned articles about the quandary that Black men faced when the country is, swept with this patriotic, we must defend the country, we must go to war. But for Black men, that was, wait, we were certainly willing to do our part. We're absolutely willing to risk our lives, but this country has never done anything for us. This country has never treated us as if we were equal citizens. One of the most important quotes that I read was by a young Black teenager who discussed exactly that question that you asked during the Spanish-American War, in which he said, war comes along and it's everybody rally to the flag, everybody defend the country. War is over, white man comes back, he's just as good as he was before. Black man comes back and he's like back in the cotton field. How is that fair? And then when World War I began, about the time that these soldiers are being sent down into Houston, articles in the NAACP were raising the same question, as in, why should Black men fight for a country that has never accepted them as full citizens? And the decision was finally made with a great deal of soul searching, and I think a great deal of real agonizing over it, that the NAACP recommended that Black men register for the draft as their country requested of them, but that they reserve the right to demand the benefits of having served their country in a time of need when the war was over. And then, of course, what we have when the war is over is the Red Summer of 1919, when Black men in uniform are assaulted all across the country as they're returning from France. We have race riots breaking out in northern cities like Chicago, where a Black boy, a young child, is drowned in a lake by white people because he swims on the white side of the rope. Race riots break out in New York and Washington, D.C., and the violence that's targeted against especially returning Black soldiers is all clearly predicated upon the idea that the white supremacists in American society are determined to restore the status quo. The fact that these men risked their lives, served in uniform, served their country, should account for nothing in their estimation. And the question you asked was actually asked over and over and over during those years by Black leaders at every level of the African American community.
Is the question still relevant today?
Yes.
There had been
the question is always relevant, I would say. In fact, the question should be asked from time to time, just to ensure that we don't complacently start to assume that we've moved past it. That we don't congratulate ourselves on being better than those people were back then. We always need to hold ourselves up to the light.
Yes, sir. Because don't you think that the circumstances after a non-white soldier is dismissed from service, Don't you think that the same history is repeated, just in a more refined fashion than it was, let's say, back during the time of your book?
It absolutely was. I mean, let's come forward 50 years from that history, okay? During the Vietnam era, we have African American men, and by this point in time, the Army has at least racially integrated the military. There are black officers in command of white soldiers. But as Colin Powell said in his autobiography, when he was a young lieutenant in the American South, and he's being stationed in Fort Benning, Georgia, he has to be extremely careful of where he goes and where he and his wife stop for gas, because Jim Crow segregation is still very much in effect. And even when Jim Crow is done away with, the violent element of white racism still was a danger in the South. And so the problem, as you've identified it, continues on in American history well until my lifetime. I was born in 1967, so it's not ancient history.
There have been opportunities even before the history that you write about, that non-white people, instead of, let's say, joining the quote-unquote Union Army, quote-unquote, could have joined some other victims of racism, white supremacy, let's say from Haiti, from other places in the Caribbean, probably also in Brazil, and took up arms. What would you say about that possibility, and would it have been just to do so?
Yes, and no. So to go backwards from the question, would it have been justified? Absolutely. It's worth taking up arms against an injustice wherever it exists, I would argue. Could they have done so? Absolutely. Although they would have had to have been extremely careful in their process of leaving the United States to not let it be known that they were doing so with the intent of joining, say, the Haitian Revolution in 1804 or the Brazilian Revolution. They almost certainly would have been stopped by American authorities at the point of departure if they would have announced that. But the question I would then ask, and this is where the no comes from, is would that have improved in any way, shape, or form the situation that African Americans were dealing with in this country during those decades? I don't think it would have. It would have certainly given them the satisfaction as individual men of being able to take up arms and fight back against an injustice that was targeting people of their race in different countries. But at the end of the day, during those years, Black people in America still faced the same dangers and same threats and the same oppression that they always had. Does that answer the question, or?
I would say somewhat, but I think I may have been misunderstood. I think what you're saying is the victims of racism and white supremacy would leave from the area that's called the United States to join those forces. I'm saying it will be a mutual situation with those other non-white forces to wage war right here. And I'm sitting in the place that's called the state of Florida, which is very close to those places.
Where, may I ask? Because I'm from Putnam County. I'm from Putnam County, Florida.
Okay.
Which is in the middle of nowhere. In my defense, I was born there. I was born there, but I did not grow up there. So.
As you probably know, there were wars that were fought.
Retired
right
firefighter. We have other
sitting.
folks who dialed in. So, did you have a final question?
Yep.
Or
no, that was it. That was
okay.
it.
Thank you kindly. Appreciate it.
Gus, can I say a couple of quick sentences to answer the question that he tried to answer?
Sure.
So, sir, my response to that would be, there's a reason why the United States government tried very hard to keep news of the Haitian Revolution from reaching the United States, because in that era, and this is also why the U.S. government refused to recognize Haiti as an independent country well until the later years of the 19th century, they were desperately afraid that the idea and the image of enslaved black people taking up arms on their own volition and fighting for and achieving their own independence from a white European power, unaided, would catch fire among the slaves held by the American southern states. That absolutely could have been something that occurred everywhere, and it absolutely would have been just. I don't believe it would have succeeded simply because of the numbers involved, but I do believe it absolutely would have been justified.
Blackwater mercenaries being sent into Haiti right now. Some things change and some things do not. Before we lab Lauren, our next caller, when we were at Elliott Bay Books, just the subject matter and interracial relationships, it did pop up. I could have sworn I met your partner. Are you married to a black female, Mr. Haymond?
Not married, but in a relationship with, yes.
Okay. Not married. Thank you for correcting. Strive for accuracy. I was like, yeah, she helped me. I was stumbling and fumbling. She helped me get the email and everything together. Much obliged. Let's see. Lauren, did you have commentary? Should be with us as well.
Hello, Mr. Haymond. Thank you for coming on the broadcast. My first question, do you have a definition of racist? And if so, what is it?
Thank you for the question. The danger with historians or academics of any sort is that we always tend to immediately run to the dictionary, right? This is what the Oxford English Dictionary says. This is what the Webster says. But if I understand your question correctly, you're asking what my personal understanding of racist is?
Correct.
Okay. As I would try to say it, for someone to be racist would mean that they would judge someone, react to someone, and act against or to someone based entirely upon their perception of the fact that they are an other, almost capital O other, as in different from themselves and different in visual ways. That would be the first, visual, which for most of us would be the color of someone's skin. Secondly, that they behave or they have different cultural norms that are predicated upon someone's concept or interpretation of what people of a certain race normally act like. And I put those in quotation marks because there's something called the logical fallacy of composition, where we look at the most egregious example of one person's behavior or one person or one personal example, and we lump everyone who is in that same group or identity into that behavior. So I think racist is a way of treating people based on a superficial identity that has nothing to do with who they really are. And it says more about the person who's exhibiting that behavior than it does the person who's the recipient of it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Will you tell us again, what are the sentences that you removed from your book?
I'm going off the top of my head here, trying to remember sentences. So it was, if you are in any way offended by historical examples of racism, of egregious acts of injustice, then stop reading now, because this is not a happy story. But if you are offended or outraged by what you read here, then your heart is probably in the right place.
Okay. Thank you for that. I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it's logical to suspect that any white person who is able to practice racism probably practices racism?
I think that any person who does not examine their own attitudes, perspectives, biases, and behaviors probably is guilty of acting in a racist way in some form or another at some point or another. I think the real danger is any of us who do not examine ourselves for why we do or say the things we do or say can very easily become a part of the problem and not a solution to it.
I don't think you answered my question. Would you like me to ask it again?
Sure.
Okay. Do you think it's logical to suspect that any white person who is able to practice racism probably practices racism?
I'm going to focus on your use of the word logical. I would say no, but only because that would assume an entire certainty and not a probability factor. I would agree, though, that I would think that probably most white people who can do, and I would be more certain that the ones who aren't conscious of being racist sometimes are, or the ones who congratulate themselves on not being racist have on occasion done, said, or demonstrated things that absolutely were racist. I think it's probably something that a great many people, yeah.
Just for confirmation, is the answer yes or no?
It's a qualified yes. I have a hard time, as a historian, I have a hard time dealing in absolutes because we're talking about a hypothetical. We're talking about something that's addressing people I've never met, people I don't know. If you're asking me about my personal experience, I've seen lots of examples that would support your position, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Much obliged, Lauren. Let's see, victim in New Jersey. They did come up briefly in the text, just briefly. Victim in New Jersey, did you have a question for Mr. Haymond?
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Haymond? In similar fashion, so that question leads me into this question, where we talk about the collective. And Mr. Haymond, there's an argument that I've seen on social media, and it also has made its way into news outlets. I've recently seen this argument on CNN as it relates to slavery and the white collective. And there's this argument that only maybe maybe like 1% or so or less or more own slaves, and people are using this argument to excuse the white collective in the crime of slavery. My question is this argument coming from academia? Like, where was this argument coming from? And do you think that is an accurate framing of slavery and white people's collective responsibility for upholding that institution?
That's a really important question. Thank you very much for raising that. To answer one part of your question first, do I think it comes from academia or from somewhere else? It's certainly an argument that is being trotted out frequently by one side of the political spectrum at present. I'm sure you can guess which side I'm referring to. As a historian, I tend to immediately be suspicious of any argument that tries to downplay the severity of something that we know was an absolute atrocity in our shared history. I mean, this would be like someone in Germany today, my age, arguing that, well, not everybody supported Hitler or the Nazis in Germany back in 1944. That doesn't absolve the entire nation, if you think about it. So when it comes to the question of, let's say, for instance, and I suspect that the percentage you cited from that source is probably wrong. I think there were probably more slaveholders amongst white Americans at the height of slavery than just 1 or 2%. I would go back to that quote that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my own family history and the side of my family that comes from East Texas. He who is silent is taken to agree. If you're not on the record of saying that slavery is a human atrocity, that slavery is wrong, if you're not actively working for the abolition of slavery, then you're condoning it. And I'm sure there were many white people in the United States in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s who said, well, I don't own slaves, so I'm not part of the problem. But if they never actually stood up and said, but slavery is wrong, I think that white America needs to spend a little less time arguing about, well, my family never owned slaves, and be more willing to have a conversation about, well, people who looked exactly like me were slaveholders, did profit from the enslavement of other human beings, that people who looked like me in every respect 50 years ago did oppress, abuse, and denigrate other people simply because they were of a different race. I don't think we as a nation ever get to move past our the baggage of our past if we are not willing to have those kind of conversations and acknowledge that maybe I didn't do it, but I mean to acknowledge that people who perhaps were ancestrally related to me or people who look like me did do it. We have to start the conversation there, I think. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And I have 2 more follow-ups and I'm done. So the first question, do you think that argument is being framed that way because of Black Americans advocating for reparations, where people make the argument, why should I owe for slavery or what followed after slavery, Jim Crow? And my second question is, with voices such as the voices that may frame arguments, like the argument that I presented to you tonight, why are those voices louder than voices such as yourself who try to depict and write history accurately, regardless of how it makes people feel? As far as their lineage and their lineage's role into slavery, if I was clear.
Well, to go with the second one,
Jim Crow.
Okay, yeah, I'm glad you put those two together because you can't talk about the one without the other. I mean, I would say that slavery leads directly to the Black Codes and Jim Crow that follow. And that really important book that came out a couple of years ago, Slavery by Another Name, you have entire American state governments devoted to the idea of trying to keep black people in a state of bondage, even after slavery has been eliminated. To try to answer your second question first, I think part of the reason is that people are reluctant to closely examine anything that might reflect badly upon their image of themselves or their understanding of their own past. As I say on my website, we may not like what the past tells us about ourselves, but the message is important. We don't have the luxury of pretending that just because we are new, enlightened, progressive selves in the 21st century, that what was done in our name 100 years ago does not touch us. It does. It absolutely does. And so I think one of the reasons why there's a concerted effort to push back against the unpopular narratives from the history that's more controversial and the history that is less pleasant is because too many people just don't want to confront it. They want to say the past is the past. I encountered this over and over when I was researching the book. People would say, that was so long ago. Why are you dragging it up now? Why are you bringing something into the present that's going to upset everything? There were numerous people in the Army who tried to kill the Clemency Project when we were working on it. And I wasn't sure that it was going to work until literally the week before it happened. So that's part of it. And forgive me, I'm sorry, I forgot the first question you asked. I'm so busy answering the second one.
Oh, no, the first question is the question that I asked, the people that's framing the question in that way. Do you think that they're framing that way to dissolve themselves and also making that framing is used as an argument against reparations? And to also follow up, do you think that because of the difficulties that you have, writing truth about history in this country, do you think it's because most powerful people in this country are racist?
At present, I would have to say I have my suspicions. Yes. I mean, well, not even my own suspicions. I think we can look at the public record right now of what's going on in American politics at this moment and say that, yeah, there are clear efforts to either revise the history to make it fit a acceptable whitewashed narrative, and I use the term whitewashed deliberately, or that there are efforts to just kind of shove the unpleasant, prickly parts of the past under the rug. Nothing to see here. Let's move on. A lot of people are opposed to the idea of reparations as soon as the word comes up, but they never actually have a conversation about what would that look like? What would that mean? I'm sure you've heard the counter argument to that. Me as a white man, I've never owned a slave. You as a black man, you were never a slave. But does that mean that we, therefore, should never have the conversation about whether or not reparations are just and merited and deserved? I would say that we absolutely should have that conversation. And it was part of the Clemency Project. And that was one of the efforts that a certain individual in the military used to try to kill the Clemency, was that it would open the Army to untold millions of dollars in liability, because that was one of the things we were advocating for, was that descendants of those soldiers were owed reparations by the U.S. Army. And I am so happy that there have been reparations paid at this point because of that. So it's a conversation that absolutely has to be had.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it.
Much obliged. Victim in New Jersey. Last few questions before we let you enjoy the rest of your Pacific Northwest Sunday. I'm kind of circling back to Lauren's question about, is it logical to suspect if this white person, male, female, what have you, if they are able to practice racism? Should we think they probably do? I'm going to a specific quote portion of the text. This is you're quoting from the Houston Chronicle here, talking about one of the victims of the shooting. And again, this is the 1917 so-called racial mutiny in Houston, Texas, where you have all of these privileged black males. 19 of them end up being hung, executed, and then approximately 100 sent off to Leavenworth after they can get convicted on participating in this so-called mutiny and killing white people in Houston, Texas. You're right. This is in the chapter Whitewash. Mr. Haymond writes, the Chronicle was not entirely accurate in its assertion that A.R. Carston was killed by soldiers accused of mutiny and riot because he was one of the people killed by random bullets in the wild, unaimed firing that broke out in 3rd Battalion's camp well before Sergeant Henry led his column of soldiers out into the city. But it was absolutely correct in its main point. A man who had nothing to do with the soldiers' grievances, who did not present any sort of armed threat, was killed just because he stepped into the path of a stray bullet fired in a moment of military panic and indiscipline, and his family truly was left destitute. That fact and the lasting impact of the other innocent lives lost that night must be taken into account in any balanced examination of this tragedy. And I was given pause with the sentence, a man, Mr. Carston, who had nothing to do with the soldiers' grievances, and unless I misread the soldiers' grievances, the racism period in general in Houston, and then their mistreatment on the streetcars, even mistreatment of the local black citizens. This started with the dice game kerfuffle, black female being manhandled by the enforcement officials, the special officers, mistreatment by police. It seemed like the black soldiers of the 24th, it seemed like they had a lot of grievances that all directly racism, white supremacy, and their mistreatment, and that would be widespread, the racism that they experienced in Houston. This is because of the white population at large, in my estimation. So in my view, A.R. Carston would have to be a part of that. Would it be possible for A.R. Carston to be not a part of this system, local system of white supremacy racism in Houston at this time period, 1917?
Absolutely. Absolutely be possible. Now, having said that, would I agree that it's probably lower down on the scale of probability? Sure. But this is where I have to come at it as a historian, first of all, secondly, as a soldier. And I will tell you right now, I wrote that entire paragraph from a soldier's perspective, not a historian's perspective. And I'll happily explain what that means if you'd like. But I will not pillory somebody that I have not found evidence to support my denunciation of them or my characterization of them in a certain way. As a historian, I probably do it personally more times than I would like to admit in my own, engagement with other people. I'm as opinionated as anyone else is. But when I'm writing as a historian, I try very, very hard to make sure that the conclusions I reach or the statements that I declare on the page are based on evidentiary support. And I found nothing about A.R. Carston as a man to say that he ever, assaulted a black person based on race, or that he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan, or any of the other things that were legitimate grievances that those soldiers had in Houston that summer. Am I absolutely willing to say, sure, in all probability, he may have been a supporter of the Jim Crow segregation laws, even if he was a pacifist, even if he believed that lynching was wrong. If he did not actually stand up and say that it's wrong, then he can be accounted as a member of, the white supremacist elite, the dominating power in the city. But in the absence of evidentiary proof of that, I focused on the military side of it then. And looking at it from a soldier, if it were me that night and I had been firing my weapon at an unaimed target and one of my stray rounds hit somebody in my unintended background and I killed a civilian, I would be liable to military law for, at the very least, an act of negligence, criminal negligence. So as a soldier, that's where I find fault. As a historian, there's not the evidence there to say that A.R. Carstens was an active racist. I won't dispute the fact that he could have been. That's certainly true. But I didn't find evidence to support a charge that he was. And I hope, Gus, you would extend me the latitude of acknowledging that in every other passage in that book where I could say that somebody did something or behaved in a certain way or believed something based on their own statements or their own actions, I was not shy about doing it.
That is true for listeners. He does call out a lot of people and gets very specific, explicit with things that they do say that are racist, labeling white supremacist, even labeling it as such. That is true. But even just listening to what you said before, and I can even, my Dubois quote is coming, calling my shot here. But man, the evidence, as you already told us, just what it means to be white. We already had the eloquent quotes from the students in the classroom. A nigger is a mule. He'll be obedient and trustworthy for 99 years, and he'll kill you once you get to the century mark. See, the nigger, we already heard that now. He didn't even say negro. See, he said negro. I should be accurate to the quotation. I would love to get those papers. But we've already had lots of illustrations of that. It would have to be, assume we had 15,000 white people at Waco. He could have been one. It would have to be the other way, that where is the record of Mr. Carsten? My name is bold. I'm in the Houston Chronicle. Treat these niggers correctly. Do the soldiers right. In fact, treat the black people correctly. When they get on the streetcar and we're taking public transportation, man, their tax dollars are a part of that too. If that's not there, we are Dr. King and many folks that are far more eloquent than I have told us. Now, you cannot just be a white person. Mr. Carson benefited from all that white power. Maybe there were white people more powerful than he, but he wasn't no Negro in Harris County, Texas. So he benefited as a white man.
True.
Even
True. No argument there.
Okay, then. That
no argument there.
If you're benefiting and you don't have, hang on one second. It can't be, I'm innocent. In fact, any of these white people to say that I'm innocent in a system of white supremacy where thousands of white people go out just to watch a lynching. We're not even talking about the support for the special officers. Where is his stance on that? And hey, put those dogs away. We're done. Slavery's over. You're not going to be taking dogs out in my name, using my tax dollars to go out and chomp on black. That's done. I don't see that with any of these white. I already said you can be a white person and be at the brothel, which he may have been for all we know, and still practicing racism. So that my Dubois quote is coming. But am I being logical, Mr. Haymond?
You're being logical.
Okay.
I would absolutely say that there's some validity to your position. No question about that. But again, and let me stress this, and any of your listeners who've ever spent time in the service will absolutely understand this. Very seldom did I take, in the book, exception with the soldiers. For instance, when they killed Rufus Daniels, the policeman who threatened Mrs. Travers on the afternoon when the two soldiers were assaulted by the two Houston policemen. Rufus Daniels was a big man, member of the special officers section of the Houston Police Department, absolutely had a well-earned reputation as a racist bully. They shot him down in the street that night. I have no problem with that. None. That was deliberate aimed fire at a known target. And this is where I come at the topic as a soldier. If a soldier aimed at somebody and killed them, I want to know who it was and why. And I may be able to excuse it even if military law says it was wrong. As a soldier, I could say, no, I get that. I understand it. I'm fine. I have the problem with wild, unaimed fire killing people at random. And I say that as a soldier who's been in situations myself where I was responsible for every time I pulled the trigger. That's where I was coming from when I wrote that section. So I think your point is well taken, and I would not absolutely disagree with your point. I think philosophically I can both understand it and agree with it. But I do want the fact that there's a military factor here to be acknowledged.
21 years in the armed services, so that's understandable. Got it. I never served, so understandable. I will say that even the wildfire, white people are most to blame for the wild. In fact, I could say one event for the wildfire.
Absolutely.
East St. Louis, Illinois. I could say that alone. I could pick a whole lot of things, but East St. Louis, Illinois, in one, I can't say word, but in one location geographically, that right there is why you got all this, in addition to the special officers and blah, blah, blah. Am I being truthful based on your book, East St. Louis?
Absolutely correct.
Okay.
And one of the things I hope people take from this book, so many people in America today know about Tulsa in 1921. But how many people had known about what happened in East St. Louis in 1917? That was the worst incident of, let's not call it racist violence, let's call it what it was, mass murder of defenseless African-American civilians in their neighborhoods, in their homes, by not just a racist mob of white people, but also complicit in that violence and in that murder and that massacre were members of the East St. Louis Police Department and the Illinois National Guard. The forces of law and order that should have protected them participated in their murder. And that only happened 7 weeks before this event in Houston. So it was absolutely on their minds. And I think this is one of the reasons why we were able to convince the Army that there were matters in mitigation that had never been taken into these soldiers' defense when they went to trial, was that these soldiers absolutely believed and understood as a reality of their lives that racist mob violence was a real threat against them, their families, and their homes. They knew that. It may be like ancient history to us, but it was a daily factor of reality as an African-American citizen in those days.
It is not ancient history here on the cows. Gus T tries to do his part, average type Negro that I am, to remind folks of this, because it is so important. There were so many of these events, and even in terms of why certain areas geographically look the way that they do, because they've had these sort of events and they drove all the black people out. So now you have places where there are no black people. It's, man, super important. My W.E.B. Du Bois quote, keeping in mind what we just said, even about Mr. Carson and whether or not now, do I think he's any white person really? Do I think that they're innocent in all of this? You were getting to Mr. Du Bois. He expressed the feelings of many black citizens in a moving article he wrote for The Crisis Black Journalists a few weeks after the Troubles. He surmised the details of the matter to the best that he knew and said, "It is hard for one of Negro blood to write of Houston. Is not the ink within the very wells crimsoned with the blood of black martyrs? Do they not cry unavenged, saying, always we pay, always we die, always, whether right or wrong?" Houston was a catastrophe born out of entrenched social injustice, Du Bois said, but it was very different from anything that had ever happened before. This, at least remember, you who jump to judgment, he wrote. Houston was not an ordinary outburst. Du Bois did not try to excuse the killing of policemen and civilians that night, which he recognized as criminal, but he could still see the provocations, the insults, and ultimately unbearable abuses that had ignited the whole bloody affair. We ask no mitigation of their punishment, he wrote of the soldiers. They broke the law, they must suffer. But before Almighty God, if those guiltless of their black brothers' blood shot the punishing shot, there would be no dead men in that regiment. End quote. Now, for this one, I'm just adding, because there is an end note for this quotation here right at the close of the chapter. So just so listeners can get the full context, our writer, Mr. Haymond, our guest, he adds, what Dubois meant by that last sentence was apparently the same idea expressed in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verse 7. He that is without sin among you, let him be the first to cast a stone, end quote. All of white American society, Dubois believed, was guilty of the blood of their black neighbors, either actively or passively, as long as racist segregation, lynching, and mob violence were permitted to exist anywhere in the nation. Now, I have to say now, that is not Dubois. That is Mr. Haymond's interpretation of Dubois. But when I read something like that, that's where I said, nope, Mr. Carson, all means all. And especially if we didn't find nothing where you were saying, treat those black brothers in the 24th, treat them correctly. Treat them correctly on the street. If I didn't find that, all means all. But are you sure you didn't misinterpret W.E.B. Du Bois there? You think that's what he meant, that, hey, all white people are guilty in this?
I think I am. And I base that not on, some kind of a supernatural empath into what Mr. Du Bois was thinking when he wrote that, but having read everything of Du Bois that I could find for the last 20 years, and he is one of my personal heroes. You want to talk about a man with physical courage, not just academic excellence. Du Bois was not just brilliant, he was brave. But I do believe that's what he meant. He believed that if you interpret the law strictly as the law is written, the soldiers of the 24th Infantry broke the law that night, and that if they were charged, tried, and sentenced appropriately, he would have no qualms with that. But what he wanted all of his readers to understand was that they had actually stood up against an entrenched racism that had affected black people for generations in the country, and that no white person could claim to be absolutely guiltless of that as part of the white establishment. And I'm with you there on that one, Gus. My objection, and the reason why I characterize A.W. Carson as innocent that night, is because he was killed by happenstance, not by deliberate agency. And here again, that's a military distinction. I realize that may be lost on a lot of people, but that's a military distinction. One question I asked myself as I worked on this case was, what would I have concluded as to guilt of all 118 men from the 24th Infantry who were charged and tried for their actions that night? I can only find one person out of the 118 that I believe could be shown to have actually committed an act that could be characterized as homicide of a named person at a known moment. I think most of those sentences are absolutely unsupportable and indefensible.
That came across in the text. Seemed like they, just from the head counts alone, seemed like they would have had a very difficult time. Like, if you really, we're going to have evidence that, pick any person you like, Jesse Ball, Jesse Moore, whomever, that we actually can verify. We did the head count. He was not here. He was out there. Somebody saw him, and we can identify him. It's not going to be no messing around. We can get somebody. Yes, you were here. We saw you. We saw you pull the trigger. Like, woo. It would have been really, really, maybe everybody would have got, he says 1 out of 118. just on that alone, can you identify, like, you sure you can pick this person out? We can get somebody like that alone. Man.
That's as close as I can get to an actual, and this is me trying to look at it from both sides of the equation, both sides of the question. That's as close as I can get to saying that one person actually comes close to the definition of legally supportable guilt. I argue, and this is one of the reasons why I believe the Army in 2023 agreed with our clemency petition, because I co-authored that 180-page clemency. We argued that the Army never actually proved that a mutiny occurred, and it didn't, and that the Army had put the reversal of the burden of proof on those men, forcing them to try to prove that they had never left camp. I argue that under the military's own process, those men left camp that night as an organized military unit, following the orders of their senior military authority, First Sergeant Henry, that they did so as a force going out to meet a perceived threat, and that the incidental violence that occurred that night was not some kind of a preconceived conspiracy. They were not setting out to kill every white person they could see. They did not even march in the direction of the nearest police station. When they realized there was no white mob for them to face, they moved in the direction of the San Felipe district, where the black neighborhood was, to protect them in case there was something happening that night. So I don't find the results of any of those three court-martials to be defensible. Now, looking at it as both a soldier and a historian, and as a specialist in military law.
Didn't even give them an attorney. You write, this is, and even going back to my question about innocent white people, and, is it logical to think that if a white person can practice racism, they probably are. You write, this is chapter 12, a mystery within a tragedy. Almost 2 weeks passed before Milholland even read Houston's letter. This is an attorney who was trying to work in support of the black soldiers. He didn't get the chance, though. In Milholland's own letter to Dr. J.E. Spingarn at the NAACP on September 13, in which he conveyed Houston's offer to the association, Milholland explained that he had just returned after a month's vacation and found Houston's missive waiting on his desk. See, we got all the missed opportunities, and I think they had an address snafu and all this, which they ended up not getting legal help that may have assisted, maybe not, but at least they wouldn't have had their attorney or their pretend attorney, Mr. Greer, sitting at the table by himself. With Dr. J.E. Spingarn, and you talk about the NAACP and their beginnings during this time period and their efforts both to keep the public aware of this case, going to the White House on behalf of these soldiers, and even the anti-lynching efforts of this time period that were obviously needed. Do you know anything else about Dr. J.E. Spingarn?
I have not yet had the chance to study his personal history. I've read some of his work, but that's about as far as I've gotten.
Okay. That's not a crime. He's somebody we've heard a lot because he's in the NAACP, a white man, and he was involved in a lot of this case, obviously, with the mutiny in Houston, and then the Little Rock Nine, just a myriad of cases where his name pops up over the time period because, such a important organization. This is from the LA Times, although I will submit the black press wrote about this. But I just wanted to pick the LA Times so that anybody listening was, that's made up. Well, okay, no problem. The LA Times wrote about this too. Column left, Alexander Cockburn, when the state is terrified, citizens beware. A Memphis reporter writing about Dr. King uncovers decades of Army spying on Americans. This is from the LA Times, April 13, 1993. By the early 1920s, the Army had a spy network across the South, places like Texas. It included Robert R. Moton, Booker T. Washington's successor at Tuskegee Institute, and no less a notable than Joel Spingarn, White Board chairman of the NAACP. Van Denman made Spingarn a major in military intelligence
and the latter, a man still much honored by the NAACP, helped operate a small unit of undercover agents. Van Diemen considered the NAACP to be communist-inspired. That's the sort of thing that I think about, where it seems like, Mr. Sping, it seems like this is not well known. So Mr. Spingarn is still well regarded by many people, and they think this guy was not racist. He was an ally of black people. He was in military intelligence to spy on black people. Important, yes. And this is in the LA Times, so I would assume we don't think the LA Times is the Onion and they just print wacky things that are not true.
Oh no, I would agree that absolutely is important, and it absolutely would fit with some of the other stuff that I found when I was working on this book.
Like what?
So, for instance, the staff judge advocate for the convening authority, General Ruckman, the man who ordered the execution of the first 13 men without appeal under secrecy, and who then approved the sentences of the other men to death. His staff judge advocate was a man named George Dunn, Colonel George Dunn. Dunn was an ardent racist. Dunn propagated and recycled every single conspiracy theory he ever heard about black sedition, which was a phrase he used frequently. He attempted, in accordance with General Runn's agreement, to try to prevent black soldiers in the Southern Department of the U.S. Army from subscribing to the Crisis, the NAACP's publication. Dunn is on record of attempting to subvert the testimony. He made claims that I was able to prove were lies about what those black soldiers said or did in the last days of their lives. Dunn absolutely used the agency of the U.S. Army to try to affect government policy. So, yeah, there's no question that there were elements within the U.S. military establishment, as also within the U.S. government, that took a covert approach to try to surveil black social activities and black civic organizations. I actually found a document in the sources that was signed by John Edgar Hoover before the FBI was even the FBI, talking about this issue.
Oh, I forgot you mentioning his name reminded me one of his victims before the FBI even existed, Jack Johnson, also a Lone Star State legend. I totally forgot.
Yes. And he's in the book.
Yes.
He's in the book too.
Yes, he is. I remember Jack Johnson from the book, but I didn't remember J. Edgar Hoover. But I would not have thought of, oh man, he was one of the original victims of this COINTELPRO spy apparatus. I remember we talked with Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly, and he said that J. Edgar Hoover and company, they were sitting around, we have to find a way to get that Negro. We have to find, it was like, dang, you generally don't do it that way. It would generally be that they committed a crime, we go invest, not, we have to find something. Did he, we have parking tickets? Can we get something? We'll figure it out. We're going to, dang. Anyway, blackmail.
Well, and during this period, there is a concerted effort, and there's plenty of evidence for it, that the government and the military tried to cast every single action by black soldiers or black community activists as somehow being seditious or treasonous or as undermining the authority and discipline of the U.S. Army. That happens all the way through the 1960s, from this point that I covered in the book.
Mm-hmm. Marcus Garvey, this time period as well. Yes, the seditious black people. Yes. And in the military, Malcolm X talked about that too. Anyway, last thing before we let you enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. I learned so much from the text. New book. Always get excited about books that are brand new off the presses. Black Soldiers, White Laws, The Tragedy of the 24th Century in 1917. Houston. I guess if I could squeeze in too, is this the type of book that would be like DEI'd? Like, is this the sort of thing they would say, oh no, Mr. Haymond, get that out of here in Houston. Like, you'll get us in trouble and have all the parents outraged. Like, have you done any sort of book reads in Texas? Do they have this in schools in Texas? Do you know?
I don't know about schools yet, but that's only because it's such a new book. I have been down to Houston. The official launch of the book was at the National Buffalo Soldier Museum in Houston.
Wow.
And then I was in Austin, where a unofficial author event was hosted by members of the U.S. Army. They wouldn't do it on a military installation, but they absolutely wanted to talk about the book. I'll be going back to Texas in November for an event hosted by the San Antonio African American Archives and Museum down there in November, and another one in Austin also. So there also was an invitation to present this history at West Point until the current presidential administration came. So we'll see how that plays out.
That's hilarious. That is hilarious. Okay. Oh man, I'd have to switch out. So is there any relevance? I was hearing this, and this is Harris County history right here, and then they having all that talk about gerrymandering and redistricting in Harris County, Texas right now, with some alleging that this is a way to practice racism and to disenfranchise black voters. And I said, man, is this the timing? Is this relevant at all? Is this relevant to what you wrote about, Mr. Haymond?
Absolutely, it's relevant because it's still playing out in real-time history today, and it's still affecting people's lives today. My personal reaction to the gerrymandering effort in Texas is to say that this is kind of the new boss, same as the old boss idea, where it's a political party that's in power right now that's doing everything it can, however nefarious, to try to maintain its grip on power. And the fact that they can do so by disenfranchising a certain spectrum of the voting constituency, and that those people seem to be concentrated in racially demographic identifiable areas, that's not lost on me. I think they're going for the soft target to achieve a shockingly bald-faced political objective, which is simply holding a grip on political power by the abuse of power.
If they're trying to disenfranchise non-white voters, that would be trying to hold on to white power, yes?
In Texas, it looks like that. Yeah.
It has been a very informative read. Folks, if you have any connections to, I'd say, Texas, period, really, but especially Houston, Waco, San Antonio, Harris County, like, you should read, probably own this book. Like, wow, it is so informative. If you are a veteran, you have any connections to the military, you should read this book. It is so informative. Check out the footnotes. Look for the black publications. Oh my goodness, it's so many. Wow, really great job.
Gus?
Yes, sir.
If I may, you have my email address, yes?
Yes, sir.
I don't mind if you invite the first two of your listeners that would like to have a conversation about it and contact me at my email. I'll be happy to send them a copy of the book.
Oh, man. How about that? How about that? So he said the first two. Drop me an email. I will shoot his email along. And he said the first two, he'll get you a man. Definitely, if you get a free copy of the book, then you have to read it because it is super informative. Man, thank you for being so generous with your time, Mr. Haymond. I learned so much from the text and the talk this evening, because this stuff you told us this evening is not even in the book. So, man, thanks so much for your time, and congratulations on the text. We will keep an eye out. I'm curious to see if this book gets DEI. They say, get this on out of here. Your revisionist history, Mr. Haymond. Get on out of here.
Well, I very much appreciate the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your conversation.
Our pleasure, sir. John A. Haymond, 21 years of service in the U.S. military and now public speaker, author, brand new book, Black Soldiers, White Laws. Visit the website and nab a copy of the text. Much obliged for your time, and we will definitely keep in touch. I guess enjoy the rest of your evening down in Tacoma, sir.
Thank you very much. You as well.
Right on. Evening, Mr. Haymond. Context of White Supremacy. New book. Always get excited. We've had like a number of like brand new books that just were published this year, 2025, right? We had Calvin Schermerhorn, right? He was talking about the way white people deliberately have made sure that black people don't have constructive finances, resources. I'm trying to think. We had Dr. Wayne A. Wiegand talked about in silence or indifference, the willful effort to make sure that black people don't read, and that came up again today. I had that in my notes to bring up, and Mr. Haymond brought it up voluntarily, where he said General Ruckman and I think his assistant George Dunn, that they worked and said, these niggers, you're not going to be getting the crisis newsletter. You're not going to be reading the NAACP newsletter. We might not even let you read the local Houston Chronicle. We don't like literate niggers. When I read that in the book, I told you I highlighted it, even though he brought it up, which was great. But when I read that in the book, I thought Jonestown immediately. Now, I also thought of Dr. Wayne A. Wiegand, in silence or indifference. We don't let the niggers read now. And especially, we don't let the niggers read anything subversive. Talking about you gonna codify your behavior and do something to practice justice. You get the sports section, maybe. The funny papers, maybe. Any hoodles. Devontae can't get through the program. Devontae Hart, Harris County. There's so much information in the book. If we'd had more time, I would have just asked him, like, does the name Devontae Hart, does that mean anything? Harris County. Anything good happened to black people in Harris County? Man, that doesn't seem like another spot like Milwaukee. Like, get out of Houston quickly. Like, my God, anything go bad down in Houston. Like, I don't care what the Astros win. I don't care if the Rockets end up doing well. They got Kevin Durant. Anything else cool happen? I've been to Galleria Mall. Don't they have the roller skating rink up on the top floor? It might even be an ice skating rink. I don't remember. But don't they have all that fanciness at Galleria Mall? They sure do. Look at it online. Any hoodles. Let's see. We'll take a quick break and then see if folks have any thoughts, what they heard from Mr. Haymond and the book Black Soldiers, White Laws. Like I said, I think reveals quite a bit about what it means to be white. System of white supremacy. In fact, you can just take a gander down at what's happening in Harris County right now, and oh yes,
And from the late 1960s, after the death of Martin Luther King and the riots and the upheavals and all like this, and black people with their fists in the air and all like that, and trying to stumble and fumble and find their way and get focus, the white supremacists made a blueprint and put it into action. And that is, I'm going to have these people so confused, they don't even know what they started out to do. And by the late 1970s, they had just about completed it. And we've been on that ever since. And you mentioned something very important. They are more comfortable than ever. But see, it's like making gorillas comfortable in a cage, or monkeys, or pandas. You still got them in a cage, but they're comfortable. See, so give him some bling bling. It's like giving an animal a brand new car and training the animal to ride up and down the street in it. And then you stand back and point at the animal. Like one white man said in the late 1950s. He said he doesn't care what kind of car a Negro has. He said he's still a nigger. And when he rides by in a shiny car, to him, it's just a monkey in a car. White people built a car, put a monkey in it, trained the monkey to drive the car, so now you're looking at a monkey in a car. See, but black people don't see themselves that way. But this is how the white supremacists see us, and they are the ones who run our business. And we have to know that when they look at us, that's what they see. That's what they see. That's what they see. And at a subliminal level, what they see begins to spill over into our brains so that we, at a subliminal level, see each other that way. And indirectly see ourselves that way.
Ape, monkey, mule, rabid dog, some sort of beast that needs to be shot, frankly. That's what they see. Yes, Fuller. That is what they see. Any hoodles, we will be here at minimum Thursday, neutralizing workplace racism, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. You can check social media for earlier dates prior to Thursday, and then Friday for the Catherine Massey Book Club, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Mary K. Letourneau. Let's see. Important points, things I wanted to highlight, and then we'll hear from listeners as well quickly. Reading, more important than watching television. I learned so much from this book, even though we had talked about this event before. Jamie Salazar, it's in the archives 2023 where we talked about this event, but anytime you can talk to white people about racism, take advantage. And this book, he used the term white supremacy, lots of accurate, specific details about this event and the many components, ways that racism was practiced by white people. The portion, I guess I can fast forward specifically, that portion where he talked about, so in this event, the soldiers at Camp Logan, black soldiers, there was fear that there was a white mob that was going to come and attack the camp. This was after they had a kerfuffle earlier in the day. Black female was shackled and snatched out of her house, and they beat up a black soldier. I didn't go into all that detail because we did that with Jamie Salazar before. We can go back and anyway. But that precipitates all of this. And then once they get back to camp, these black people, they are afraid, oh no, a racist mob is going to come get us. And they had racist mobs all the time during this time period. Elliot Jaspin, author of Buried in the Bitter Waters, he was a guest on the program in 2010. He said it happened at least 260 times where racist mobs came and killed a bunch of black people and forcibly evicted them from the town. That's not even talking about the number of times where white people just got together for kicks and went out to go shoot up the neighborhood. We didn't necessarily drive all the niggers away. We just killed up a few, 10 or 50 of them for fun. Anyway, but when the shooting breaks out at the camp, it is, as he's just kind of unorganized. They're just kind of shooting wildly. They're not really aimed at anybody. There is no white mobs. They're just, and it's dark too. They look at the almanac and find out what time the sun goes down. So this happens once it's dark. So they're just, you're afraid. And I think they even have a white person who testified that they were so traumatized by all of the other racist mob events that had happened and just racism in general, that if someone had said boo, they would have started shooting again. I mean, racial trauma. But where he says that A.R. Carston, this white man who got shot and killed, because I think several white people were shot and killed with this stray shooting that happened, and then they actually, about 119 of them went out and deliberately shot individuals. He told us about some of the folks that they shot, police officers, civilians too. But the original round of shooting where A.R. Carston is one of those who gets shot and killed, And he says, you know, he was innocent, bystander and all of that. There's no such thing in a system of white supremacy if you are classified as white. And that, it even reminded me of The Half Has Never Been Told. The reviews of that book, some of them were so hostile because, and they said, hey, this dude, Ed Baptist, is trying to make it seem like all white people are racist. He didn't say that old tacky line. Now, not all white people was racist. You know, some of the white people was cool and looked out and put some cornbread out for the slaves. He didn't say that. They wrote the reviews of that book and said, man, Ed making it seem like all white people is racist. That's what it reminded me of. That, nah, man, you don't have no innocent white people in a system of white supremacy racism. Like, nah, man, I don't know if A.R. Carston was in the Klan or not, and that's really irrelevant if he was in the Klan or not. Really, I said, we could fast forward. Did he make any effort to say, hey, we should get this anti-lynching bill passed? Now, even if he had done that, whatever, but did he do that? Anything to say, hey, we need to do right on these streetcars, man. Black passengers get on, you know, they pay their money and all that. Let's make sure they can sit down and be comfortable too. Did he do that? Anything? Maybe we should stop calling the soldiers niggers. They put that uniform on and they're out there protecting our freedom and our liberties and all that, keeping us safe in the world. Hey, we should stop calling them niggers, maybe. If he didn't do none of that, man, like, come on. Nah, he is not innocent. There's no such thing as a innocent white person in a system of white supremacy racist, tiptoeing us right back. Not all white people is racist. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Wrong. Let's see. The Joel Spingarn, S-P-I-N-G-A-R-N. His name comes up so many times. I don't remember exactly when I learned that, oh, this guy is a spy, like COINTELPRO, and was there for a long time period. In fact, they have awards that are named after him. Like, I don't want to hear no nonsense about black people are super intelligent about racism. Wrong. We are super ignorant. They still have NAACP awards named after this guy who was a member of U.S. military intelligence to spy on black people. And he has an award named after him. I guess we didn't get that edition of the LA Times. But that sort of thing, that's what I mean. Like, it's no such thing as, this is a guy who he would have had the receipts. I'm out here trying to get the anti-lynching legislation. I'm out here trying to get legal assistance for these black brothers who, you know, going to get court-martialed and executed, some of them, at least put in Leavenworth prison for years and years. I'm trying to get assistance for them. Trying to see if we can go talk to the president, Wilson, see if we can get some assistance for them, Clemency. He'd have a lot of receipts. Military intelligence to spy on Negroes. What does it mean to be white? And really, what does it mean to be white when he said it was impossible to keep the white men out of the Negro brothels? Their best clients were white men. They wrote about this all the time. I would love to see some of those original sources. Like, what? What? He said Jesse Ball, his dad was white. That was the one I read at the beginning where he tricked his mom so he could enlist, and then he ended up being one of the ones executed. She didn't even know where he was buried at. White dad. Would love to know what's the story on that. Like, what? What? Impossible? How can that be? How can that be? It's impossible to keep racist man out of the black brothel. Did we just hear that yesterday? You're not a real man till you split some dark oak. That don't sound like you just go and split. You got to have the whole forest of oak. Impossible? How many Negro children in Texas got a white dad? Because it was impossible to keep them away from the black brothel. That's what I mean. Like, all that we have been lied to so thoroughly. Say, you see, all we need is more interracial relationships. There, I remind our guest did say black female girlfriend. but that's all we need to end racism. And I said, touche. We've had lots and lots and lots of that. If that was, Houston should have been the most racially hospitable place ever. Like, oh man, we can't stay out the brothel. Your son need anything? Pair of socks? Job recommendation? Let me know. I'm going to hook it up. You know you my favorite. That didn't happen. Woo, I would love to get some of this. See, I would be way more interested in reading. It would just be, what do we have to read? Like, oh, we can read about how the white men, they just all day and night up at the Negro brothel. I thought, what y'all even doing on this side of town? I thought you said stay away from you and Stromtha. See? Anyway, let's see. Black misandry. It's lots more I can say. I guess let me get one on the black misandry, and then we'll see what the folks have to say. One for black misandry. I'll try and pick the best example. I think I read quite a few, and I wasn't even going into this book reading thinking, yeah, that'll be the main topic, but it comes up so. Oh, this is a good one. We'll do this one. All right, for black misandry. In Houston, the condemnation was even more direct and aimed at more than just the soldiers of the 24th Infantry. The Negro military units must not be quartered in southern communities, the Houston Post declared in an editorial that ran that Saturday. The southern cities are not going to change their laws to suit the demands of Negro soldiers, nor are they going to submit to insolence, mutiny, riot, and murder. The Negro soldiers resent our separate coach laws, our customs, which prohibit mixed socializing, except white men at the Negro brothel. But this measure of separation is absolute, except at the Negro brothel, and will be maintained. Houston, the Post stated, is not going to have men, women, and children ruthlessly murdered with United States Army rifles in the hands of frenzied blacks, is not going to revolutionize her customs in order to conform to the views of any outside element whatever. End quote. The threat enclosed in that diatribe was hardly subtle in saying that the well-being of Houston's black residents depends upon the cordial relations with white people. The writer was stating that every Texan understood as an immutable truth the only fragile social safety African Americans could hope for was based on submission to the existing racial power dynamic. The Post expanded its vitriol to include black residents of the city who had nothing to do with the violence under the headline, "Round up Negro vagrants at once." The paper proclaimed the existence of a conspiracy never proven since the arrival of the Negro troops at Camp Logan, an element of rebellious and disorderly Negroes of the local population has freely mingled with them, the result being that their imaginations have become considerably inflamed. They have looked forward to such an outbreak as happened Thursday night, the only solution to prevent further outbreaks of racial violence, the paper claimed, was to round up every idle Negro and vagrant in this city and county and place him under duress. They meant black males exclusively because it continues, and there is a certain class of Negro females who are quite as dangerous to the peace of the community as their vicious male consorts. What? Who are these black females, by the way? Man, it's like that throughout, where it is so targeted and specific to these Negro males. And I guess if you can't stay out of the black brothel, then, Anyway, folks who dialed in, thoughts, observations. Let's see. Victim in New Jersey, Lauren, retired firefighter. If you all have a thought to share, proceed.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
I had a couple of thoughts. Like, right at the beginning, when you asked him if he was a white man, he said, you know, he's a picture poster of a middle-aged Caucasian white male. Did he say white or did he say Caucasian? Let me ask that question. I remember him saying Caucasian, but I don't know if he said white.
He said Caucasian, and then he said yes, white man. So, but He did say Caucasian.
Okay. Well, just Caucasian and white, I don't think those are exactly synonyms. I was thinking about the Tsarnaev brothers. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that he thought non-white people could practice racism. But when he was talking about his ancestors, and he's talking about his mom's family living in East Texas, the dad lived like 100 miles away. He said his ancestors supported segregation. Now, he hesitated. I don't remember him saying that his ancestors practiced racism. But then he was like, he who remains silent is taken to agree. And then he said, you know, they wouldn't have thought of them as, I'm thinking racist, but by today's definition. So I thought, okay, he has a definition. But when I asked him I didn't really get a definition from him, just a lot of talking. He did make it clear, though, that non-white people could practice racism. And also, when I asked him the third question, do you think it's logical to suspect that any white person who is able to practice racism probably practiced racism? And he started talking about absolutes, but I didn't say absolutely or definitely practices racism. I said probably. So I thought that was really interesting. And later on, when he was talking about white people, he said did profit, did oppress, did abuse, like past tense. But white people still do these things, like present, not past tense. And that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Much obliged. I thought that was important as well, because you did say, you know, do you think it's logical that if this white person is capable of practicing racism, that they probably, not absolutely, definitely, most for sure are, no, they probably are. Particularly, like I said, it's not even that Du Bois said all white people are guilty, because that's kind of an absolute. That's his interpretation, that all white people are guilty. Like, man, you did put that in the book, right there in the chapter, read it all the way. Now, if that's true and you think that that's legitimate, then, oh man, come on. That should be an easy one. It's not even any cause for all those buckets of words and all that going back and forth and, well, and I can't, come on. Come on. Anyway, I thought even before he got to saying that his white parents in Texas supported segregation, I thought he said that they were against racial violence. Like, I thought we were almost going to get in there. Not all white people is racist. I think he did start off that response with that they didn't, they weren't about lynching and, they weren't out buying, Jesse Washington's teeth in Waco. I don't think they were about that, but I think they did support segregation system of white supremacy. Duh. Let's see. Any other folks' commentary they wanted to share?
Yes, sir. My question was based on my thoughts and attempting to think logically about, all of these battles globally. I should have actually said that. All of these battles globally by white people, the ultimate goal was to maintain the global system of racist white supremacy. So That's why I asked the question. They're logically speaking, there's no logical reason on why we should be forced to participate in that activity. And basically, the only thing we would be accomplishing is helping the races maintain their global system. That was my thought. Because I heard talk about the military assisting into spying on non-white people. Wasn't the U.S. Army across the street from the Lorraine Hotel when Dr. King was killed at that fire station?
I think William Pepper reports that in his book on Dr. King's assassination. He was also one of the attorneys on the King assassination. But yes, I think that's in Dr. Kenneth O'Reilly's book as well, about the military presence in Memphis at the time of the assassination, maybe even involvement.
Yes, that's what I read. And I mean, there's tons of questions that I could have asked this guy. Yes. Thanks for the program. Oh, and I am going to gain access to that book at the library, I guess.
Brilliant. I used to say that more, I guess, out front. When it's a white person's book, get it from the library, used copy, but I do encourage that we not purchase books from white people. I did not purchase this book. And I've said that's in the archives for like 16 years. I've said that you can always go to the library. I've done that tons. If the book is so constructed and you need a physical copy, get a used copy. He said, first two people, you can email Gus. You really need untiljustice@gmail.com. Drop me an email. He said the first two people that email him, he will get you a free book. So, hey, there you go right there. And then if you are not amongst the first two, it should be at the library, or you can we talked about that before, that can be your counter-racist experiment. See if you can make a request for this book at your local library, and then see if they fulfill the request. Do they make up some sort of excuse? It's written by a white man, it's got footnotes. It's a history book. He's a veteran. What's the problem? Certainly in Texas they should have it. Certainly. I mean, Victim in New Jersey, did you have commentary to add? Might have dissed us. Oh well. Any hoodles. As I said, we'll be here minimum Thursday, neutralizing workplace racism. The white people, I would say this, if I was one more question, I suspect we all could have asked a lot more questions, but there was one more. Who is more informed about racism, white supremacy? Oh man, he has a whole section in this book talking about how, I mean, you already heard Jesse Ball, beginning of the book, Jesse Moore Ball, whatever, that his mom did not know where he was buried at. He was one of the 19 that was executed, and they made sure to hang them. They could have got a firing squad, but we're going to hang you niggers. But he gets, Jesse Ball, he gets hung along with these other, 18 black males, and they don't even identify where this spot is. Oh, and they turned it into a golf club. The location where they were originally buried, they got moved to official military cemetery really recently, but where they were originally buried, golf course. There we go. I think it's like the 14th hole specifically or something, where they have the exact location on the golf course where these black males were buried at originally. Privileged. black males. But if I was going to share anything, like I just said, so his mom, Jessie Ball, didn't know even where her son was buried at for the longest. White people did. So much of the information about this case, white people restricted access to it for the longest. He talked about both here in Seattle when he spoke at Elliott Bay Book Company like last month, and it's in the book. He talks about how the military would not release any of their records about this case. They would not release like the trial transcripts for the court martials. They wouldn't release the prison records for any of the black males at Leavenworth. There was like 100 of them. They wouldn't release any of those records. Nothing. So, and even other white people. There was a white man who wrote a book about all this in the 70s. He didn't get access to a lot of this information because the military, they just, not on all that. So a lot of this, and he even says that the fact that he served in the military for 21 years, he's a white man who served in the military for 21 years, and he had other white friends who were in the military, and they were able to aid him in getting access to material where, from what he said at Elliott Bay Books, access to material that sometimes seems like white people were reluctant to give over this information. I think he said that some of the white people said, hey man, Mr. Haymond, you can't be doing all this and suggesting that reparations are owed. Like, oh my God, that could be millions of dollars and it's embarrassing and all the rest of it. But he had white friends to help him get that information. I suspect if instead of John A. Haymond, if he had been Leroy Jackson, even if he did have 21 years of military service, Fuller Jr. did 2 tours. Jackie Robinson was a veteran in World War II. I suspect if either of them, hey, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to write a book on the mutiny in Houston. Let me get some of the military records. I'm going to make me a request. I don't know if they would have got the same response as Mr. Haymond. Even Fuller, like I said, with 2 tours, I don't know if he would have got the same response as Mr. Haymond trying to get this information as what he said, the poster child for a Caucasian middle-aged white man. Any hoodles, who is more informed about racism? Importance of the black press, importance of black veterans and military personnel. We'll be here at minimum on Thursday. Catherine Massey Book Club on Friday. Invest if you think the cows is constructive. Hit the blog racism-notes.blogspot.com. PayPal button in the top right corner. You'll see the links for Cash App, Venmo, and PayPal. Enormous gratitude to all the investors who kept us on the air for 16 plus years. Hopefully we have been worthy of your time and energy. The Cash App address, cash.app/$the cows. Enormous gratitude to all of the folks who have invested. Certainly, as usual, sobriety would be best. They accuse so many of these black male soldiers. They were lewd and drunk, and they brought in all these loose black females. The nerve, given what we've heard, but they brought in all these loose black females to sneak in all this hooch, contraband liquor, and get wild, rowdy, frenzied, drunken, black, and there was so much of that in terms of this time period. Even you would have a lot of the temperance and prohibition groups. That would be how they would pitch it. Like, we got to have a control on the liquor. We got these Negro males, and they go out here and they get the Budweiser, and they rape the white women, and we cannot have it. Stay out of the brothel, then, white man. Sobriety would be best. Creator, we ask that you help us refrain from saying not all white people are racist. Remind us, stop name-calling people classified as black. Stop producing throwaway offspring. Remind us not to waste non-white people's time and energy, especially our own. Maximize our time and energy to replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.